Future by Jennie Moench, a collection of science fiction short stories published by Warrior Publications. Copyright 2018 by Jennie Moench. All rights reserved, including the right of reproduction in whole or in part in any form, audio or printed. And now I'm going to be reading to you from the very last story in my book, Near Future. It's called AI, and so of course it's about artificial intelligence. And in this story you get to meet Liam Moore, who is the heir to the Ian Moore empire that was founded by his grandfather. And they're in the business of robotics and other intelligent products. But I concentrate mainly on their souls, or their programs, rather than the automatons that they inhabit. Liam's a 23-year-old who was raised by the first robotic incarnation of Ian's programming, Arthur. I try to paint a picture of someone whose education, nurturing, and life experiences are mostly attributed to a robot. I hope you find this entertaining. AI, Story 5 in Near Future by Jennie Moench. It was the first warm day of spring, almost warm enough to go without a jacket at all, but Liam and Arthur were both clad in lightweight jackets as they stood on the sidewalk watching a street performer. He was wearing a tight-fitting electric blue suit that made music as he danced. They had tickets to the theater, but neither wanted to go indoors. Instead, they watched the dancer with interest. Finally, Liam asked Arthur, "How much does a suit like that cost?" "Anywhere from $300 to $3,000. It depends on how many sensors you want it," Arthur answered. Liam considered this for a minute as they continued to watch the man dance in a very acrobatic way. "I suppose you'd need special dancing classes," Liam mused aloud. "You could dance differently. You could create your own music, and the suit would produce your own special music." Liam thought about this a while. "Let's order one," he finally concluded. "Order the best you can locate." They continued down the sidewalk and walking the opposite direction of the theater that they had tickets for, until Liam spied his favorite coffee shop that also offered French pastries. He led them inside, then sat at an empty table next to a large window. "I'd like a coffee and a Bavarian cream chocolate croissant," Liam explained to Arthur as he was sitting. Arthur looked down at the young man. "If we arrive too late, they won't admit us into the theater until intermission." Liam looked away thoughtfully. "We could take it with us." "The theater doesn't allow you to bring food or drink." Liam frowned. "Well then, forget about the coffee. Just get the croissant and put it in your pocket. Get two." Arthur turned and walked to the counter, leaving Liam to gaze out the window. He watched a group of youths about his age as they laughed and talked noisily outside. Liam envied them. He was a nice-looking 23-year-old with light hair and expressive eyes. He was nearly 6 feet and of a medium build. He worked out regularly, ate a balanced diet, and had a quality education. But his only friend was Arthur. He had grown up with his best friend, who was also his caretaker and professor. He'd never been without him. They looked about the same age, even though Arthur was much older. In fact, Liam had inherited Arthur from his father. The two of them had grown up together. Arthur would often tell Liam stories about his father. It was comforting, as his father and son seldom saw one another. Liam's father was a very busy man, always traveling and giving lectures. So Liam's father had long ago left his son in the hands of the most competent person he knew, Arthur. Soon Arthur was back with a strange bulge in his pocket. Liam stood up. "Theater," he muttered as he walked towards the door, with Arthur following behind. The two took long, quick strides to arrive at the door of the main stage within minutes of curtain call. A familiar man wearing a gold-trimmed suit of a nutcracker come to life immediately closed the doors as he saw the men approach. He stood in front of the doors with a stern look. The pair stopped, stared down the doorman. Liam addressed Arthur. "Give him money." Arthur offered the man a $100 bill. He accepted it, then without words he stepped aside and let the men enter. Arthur noticed that a couple who were walking behind them followed without making a payment. "That man is in the business of extortion," Arthur observed as they walked briskly to the center front row seats. Liam ignored the comment as he maneuvered his way among the railing to that separated the orchestra from the first row of patrons, who were all seated. The lights were beginning to dim as they became comfortable in their seats. Liam removed his jacket and handed it to Arthur, then held out his hand. "Croissant," he ordered. Arthur placed the bag on his open palm, then folded his jacket neatly before laying it on his own lap. Liam reached inside the bag and pulled out one pastry, then flattened the bag. "Why is there only one?" "You should not eat two. They are high in calories with very little food value." Liam made a face, then settled into a seat, carefully pulling the flaky pastry apart and scooping the excess cream that squished out into his first bite. The room went black until a man appeared to float from a starry night sky overhead to the stage in a hologram of a hot air balloon. "Give me my glasses," Liam commanded, reaching out to Arthur with sticky fingers. Arthur pulled out a napkin, set it in Liam's hand, and then laid the augmented reality lenses on top. Liam carefully applied the glasses to his face with his napkin, then settled back into a seat. Looking through the glasses, the stage lit up brightly colored with flora and animated sprites and little people. The play could have been viewed without the glasses, but the special effects that AR offer caused the play to become an interactive spectacle. One of the sprites flew close to Liam's face and blew him a kiss. The two men watched the play in silence until the curtains closed and the lights were turned back on for intermission. Liam stood up, stretched, and sat back down. "Arthur, get me a drink. Water with ice." Arthur stood, laying Liam's jacket onto the seat after he rose. "And a wet towel," Liam added. Arthur made his way towards the concession stand in the outer room. A stout middle-aged man sitting next to Arthur noted the exchange and looked on with disapproving frown. Liam scanned the back of the theater and noticed a large tree with small movements that turned out to be winged monkeys. He made a jabbing motion with his finger that caused the swarm of the little beasties to fly at him and make him laugh out loud. When his eyes fell back onto the man 2 seats away, Liam noticed that he was glaring at him and looking as though he wanted to tell him something. "I just have a question," the man started. Liam looked at him with interest. "What is it about this play that makes you people so crazy about it?" Liam understood the words but not the meaning. "I'm just here because of my wife, but why do you people like it so much?" Liam still didn't understand, but decided that whatever the man's question was about, it most likely was intended as an insult. He just shrugged, then turned his attention to the herd of unicorns that were grazing on the other side. Soon Arthur was back with a glass of ice water and a wet and dry towel. He stood in front of Liam as he wiped his sticky fingers on the wet towel and then dried them and then took his glass of ice water. Arthur took the soiled towels, then deposited them into his jacket pocket and sat down. The man sitting next to him was closely observing the interaction, but now he had a drink in each hand. His face was crimson. Within a minute, the man poked Arthur with his elbow and posed the same question to him, while Liam had acquired a holographic ray gun and was entertaining himself by shooting the unicorns. Arthur considered the man's words. "When you say 'you people,' are you including all of humanity excepting yourself?" The man looked perplexed. "I'm talking about the two of you," he pronounced with frustration in his voice, pointing with an index finger while still holding his drink. Arthur followed the man's finger to Liam, who was quietly enjoying his game and ignoring the exchange. "I believe Liam's enjoying himself, but I will remain neutral in the subject until the end of the play." The man wrinkled his brows so that they met in the middle of his forehead. "What kind of smart-ass answer is that?" His voice had grown louder. "Maybe I misunderstood your use of the word crazy. Did you mean the synonym for insane, or were you suggesting that we should enjoy it with fervor?" Liam could hear the conversation and decided that it might become aggressive. "Stop harassment," he stated in a calm, clear voice. Arthur immediately ceased his side of the conversation and turned his head in the direction of the closed curtain in front of him. The man continued to watch, his mouth agape as he recalled a news story that he had viewed online. Then a glimmer of recognition in his face as the lights were dimming. He blurted out, "Hey, you're that kid that was raised by a robot, aren't you?" he said with a nudge to his wife, and he began talking excitedly. "That's that robot that raised the kid, and the kid." Arthur and Liam ignored the man and faced the stage as the curtains had rised. This wasn't the first time they had encountered someone who recognized them. Arthur was really the elongated version of his legal first name, which was simply Art, while his last name was the same, Project. He began his existence as an assignment that was given to a first-year computer science student named Ian Moore. His assignment was to create an entry into an art show. He had chosen to create a program that used a series of conditional statements. If this is true, then take this course of action, asking the computer operator to answer questions. Then the program would use those answers to ask more questions until it became obnoxious and insulting to the user. He enjoyed the program so much that over the years he continued to add to it until he had a program itself saving the answers to its own questions in a matrix that grew every time the program was run, leaving off with its inquiries until activated again. This was the program that he tinkered with, then downloaded onto the internet. This program that was now writing itself became a version of artificial intelligence. It became Arthur's soul. So what Arthur really was a program, a self-writing program that was downloaded into the body of his own design. Art Project had become Arthur Project. Ian Moore was Liam's grandfather. The man sitting next to them was getting louder and distracting everyone around him. Hey, I'm right, aren't I?" The man was trying to shake Arthur's arm to get his attention. Arthur remained immovable, his eyes open in the direction of the stage in front of him, as was Liam. Finally, to everyone's relief, an usher approached the man and told him that if he didn't quiet down, he would have to leave. Reluctantly, the man obeyed. Liam continued to enjoy the second half of the play while Arthur remained motionless with his eyes in the direction of the stage. When it was finished, Arthur turned to Liam. "I've summoned the transporter." Liam considered this for a moment. They didn't have any plans for the remainder of the evening, and the man next to him did appear hostile. They had been in many uncomfortable situations in the past from men like that one. "Yes," he conceded. The angry man's wife pulled him along by the arm, hurrying him to the exit. But the damage had been done. All the people within the vicinity of the seat were now watching them as they slowly followed the crowd out of the theater and into a glass-enclosed drive-through. There was a time when this sort of attention would have mortified Liam, but after enduring 23 years of it, he appeared unfettered. They waited quietly for the transporter, ignoring the gawks and whispers. Their transporter was a newer model, a Razor, with a plush sofa on one side where Liam liked to sit and watch out the long window that spanned the length of the vehicle. He sat sideways on the couch, resting his arm on the back of it, watching the city lights go dim as they traveled into the countryside. They lived in an older brick manor just outside the city limits. It sat in the center of a 1-mile block of property that was edged by houses whose occupants Liam did not know, even though he had lived in that house his whole life. A brick wall surrounded the property with a wrought iron gate which allowed them access to a long, tree-lined asphalt drive that ended in a drive-through where the vehicle stopped to deliver its occupants inside. After they had disembarked, it traveled on, exiting the house and parking in a large garage that was connected to the house on one side. "I'm going to the game room to practice my tennis," Liam explained, as he walked out of a set of double doors that led to a large empty arena where he donned his latest virtual reality goggles, while Arthur quietly made his way to the living room. He removed his clothes and then sat in his chair, one that he had designed himself. It was large and made out of a dark metal, except for some padding on the edges of the arm of it. It was his charging station. He sat still with his lower legs pushed against the bottom part of the chair so that every possible inch of his exterior made contact with the metal chair. It helped with the efficiency of the charging. A few hours later, a freshly showered Liam appeared in a white terry cloth bathrobe. He casually took a seat on Arthur's lap and rested his head on Arthur's shoulder, as was his custom. It was a comfortable place that he enjoyed since infancy. Liam was the reason Arthur had installed the padding on the outside arms of his chair. "Arthur, what did that man sitting next to us in the theater mean when he asked, 'Why do you guys like this play so much?'" Arthur considered this for a moment. "I wondered about that myself. In researching an answer, I found that a film version of the story is often considered the most popular film of all times. Some of the reasons for this are that it was one of the first filmed in color, and one of the themes of the story is fondness for childhood. To pinpoint the segment of society that the man was referring to, I did find that there is a group of adults who are especially fond of the story that are LGBT. The man may have erroneously believed that we were a homosexual couple." Liam sat up and considered this for a moment, then asked, "Why would he think that?" "I think he was angry and looking for a reason to be insolent." Liam returned his head to Arthur's shoulder, still puzzling over the events of the day. But then he decided that it was probably not important. "Arthur, tell me about my father from when he was my age." "Well, he didn't finish at university until he was 27. Your grandfather had paid for me to go as well, so that I could go to class with him and live as a roommate at the dormitory." "Did he like it that you spent so much time together?" "Yes and no. I was a novelty, so I caused him much attention, but there were some students and faculty that wished to spend time with me away from Alan. I had a social life. I think sometimes he resented my popularity, but I was good at helping him with his homework. Your grandfather coded me against doing it for him. I could only tutor and give him assignments. This would make him angry. But your grandfather had coded me that way. Did you want me to tell you a story about him?" "Yes. Tell me about my father's social life at the university." "He enjoyed participating in sports of all kinds. He was on the soccer team, a track team, tennis team, swimming team, and volleyball team. He would spend the summers traveling the world surfing. His father felt that these pursuits were the cause of his delay in graduation for university." "Do you believe that it was?" "Yes. He was preoccupied with physical rather than academic achievements." "Did you ever surf?" "No. Entering the water would require changes to my body and programming that I didn't feel would be useful enough to spend the energy on. But I did make sure that you had the appropriate swimming lessons. Swimming is good exercise and helpful in case that you were in a dangerous situation that involved deep water." "Was my father ever close to marriage?" "I do not know. He had several female relationships that sometimes overlapped. The overlapping part would cause the women to become hostile. Then he would discontinue the relationship." "What about my biological mother?" "Your father had no personal relationship with her. They never met in person. All appointments were very formal with an attorney and often the woman's husband. Your father wanted a child, but not a marriage." "Show me my mother's photo." Arthur summoned a holographic image by way of his wireless connection, then pressed and held a button on the front panel of the arm of his chair so the image was projected in front of them. Liam sat up to look at it. He studied the woman's pale complexion, her light hair and eyes. It was taken shortly after she had become pregnant with him. Her figure was still slim, and she looked fit, probably close to his current age. "Do you have a photo of her as she looks today?" "Your father has instructed me to discourage you from further inquiry. He said that it would violate their legal agreement." Liam frowned. "I might look for the information myself, then." "That would be your prerogative. I cannot stop you, but it would make your father unhappy." Liam sighed, then laid back onto Arthur's shoulder and continued to stare at the young woman. He felt something like curiosity, but different. He wanted to know what she was like and how she felt about him. Did she even think about him? "Arthur, how old was I when I left her?" 1 year. Liam sat up again. 1 year? She kept me for a year before Dad took me? "Yes, your father wanted you to have the benefit of 1 year of mother's milk. It was good for your immune system." Liam considered this for a few minutes. He had always felt that he could remember her, but he thought it was probably only a trick of his mind. Arthur, what is the youngest age that a person can form a lifelong memory? There is no conclusive data on that, but there are a few people who claim they remember their birth. Most common would be about the age of 2. Liam leaned back again onto Arthur's shoulder. He stared at the hologram. He could almost smell her, and he knew that she was gentle. The almost memories tormented him. For several minutes before he shook his head, stood up, and went to bed, leaving Arthur alone with the hologram. Liam woke by the sunlight that had flooded his room. Sleepily, he shuffled across his room to a large window that was letting in the light. The formally dressed window was covered by a white polarized sheer curtain. Liam pulled it aside and opened the window and screen. The air was damp but warm. His view was wooded, without another resident in sight. A short distance of field separated his window on the second floor from the tree line. Birds were making a beautiful chatter from full green trees. He stood there for several minutes, naked and leaning out the window, looking for wildlife as the shears blew around him. Feeling hungry, he retrieved his robe, then bound down the bedroom door and out the enormous staircase to the main floor. The kitchen with its attached green room house was a simple dining room with a turret of glass windows. There were French doors that led outside to a small garden. It was all very lovely. As soon as Arthur heard Liam's noisy descent down the stairs, he stopped with his other household chores to set Liam's coffee on the table and begin preparing his breakfast. Liam sat down and began drinking his coffee. "I wanted to go on a hike today and go swimming," he announced. Arthur set a plate of scrambled eggs and potatoes in front of Liam, then returned with a bowl of yogurt and fresh fruit on top. "It is still too cold to go swimming." "I don't care," Liam retorted in the declarative tone of someone who has only recently become acquainted with their adult powers. Then Arthur stopped in front of Liam. "Your father is coming home tomorrow." Liam's heart leapt. "What time?" he asked excitedly. "His plane is due at 6 p.m. Liam dived into his breakfast. He always got excited to see his father. It was always a happy event, even though it meant a business meeting and the usual preparation for another seminar. Liam was expected to be a presenter at them. Promotions and science discussions about Arthur, his programming, and what life was like living with a robot. The family business that Liam's grandfather Ian had started was worth a fortune now. Arthur's program had been downloaded into a variety of intelligent appliances besides other robots. The original art project, now referred to as Arthur 1, was still connected and growing on the internet. It was now a powerful search engine. This was another leg of the Ian Moore empire. Even though Ian Moore had long ago passed away, now Liam's father Alan was running things, and Liam was technically the sole owner of the business. "I still want to go on a hike," Liam insisted. "Let me know when you have the transporter packed. I'd like lunch to be served outside on a table near the lake." Liam quickly finished his breakfast, then walked through the French doors and visited the garden. There were fruit trees and raspberry bushes that created a kind of wall of green around a small cement pond. Liam went upstairs to get ready after his visit with the garden. Arthur began following him, explaining that lunch would be served cold, but that the hiking gear was loaded. "I'll be down soon," he promised as he continued up the stairs. He located his swimming trunks that Arthur had laid out for him, then cotton pants and a slip-on shirt. He found his hiking shoes sitting in the front of his closet where Arthur had set them. Shortly dressed and eager, Liam ran down the stairs again, meeting Arthur in front of a large transporter, which had already been packed with the things. The extended travel transporter was of a good design, with all the modern equipment, including a bathroom. At first, Liam began to object when he noticed which vehicle that they were to use. They also had a smaller, faster transporter, but without the bathroom. "This trip will be nearly an hour long," Arthur explained. "You may need to use the facilities, and I don't want you to use the germ-infested ones at the park." "Wouldn't be nearly an hour long if we took the Razor," Liam complained as he stepped inside the vehicle. Arthur was right about the traveling time, 55 minutes. The ride was pleasant. Liam sat in his usual place on the sofa with his arm resting on the back of it while he watched the scenery fly past through the long window. When the transporter came to a stop next to a trailhead, Liam stepped out gingerly while Arthur, clad in a large backpack, followed. Liam looked around himself with a smile. Everything was just as it had been the last time he had been there, but with more green and less snow. Everything except his old dog Ernest, who he really missed. There were a few other people milling around. Several were sitting at picnic tables. Liam ignored them and headed towards the rustic trail, walking fast, but then running at full speed, leaping over roots and wet spots. He knew the way to the lake by heart. It required changing paths several times, up and down twisting narrow trails, but the run was exhilarating for Liam. Arthur followed, but at a less reckless pace. Light shone through the grooves of the oak and maple trees, making the shaded ground speckled. The foliage was new and not so thick that you couldn't see deep into the tree line. Liam slowed down to look for deer, but only saw chipmunks and squirrels. At a bench that was sitting next to a fork in the trail, Liam veered to the right, where the path became sandy, and the shadows of the trees were slowly replaced with sunshine and a large clearing. Then there it was, the lake. It could be seen behind a mass of dead reeds, remnants of last year. He stopped, shook off his shoes, and quickly removed his trousers and shirt, tossing them on the ground. Then he ran into the water. It was cold, and the shock of it made him laugh heartily before ducking his head under and swimming to its center. He was a strong swimmer. Meanwhile, Arthur was walking at a steady pace till he caught up with his ward. He began collecting Liam's belongings, shaking the sand from them and folding the clothes neatly. He stood near the water's edge and removed the backpack to pull out a fresh white towel in anticipation of his master's return. He watched him swim laps. It was a curiosity to him. He began calculating the code that would be necessary to imitate Liam's movements in the water. Then he observed Liam swim to the center of the body of water and dive down. He was under for a couple minutes, but just as Arthur was becoming concerned, his head popped back up to the surface for a breath of air before diving under again. Arthur decided that there must be curious things underwater. He speculated what they might be. Quarry was the core of his original programming. After several minutes, a wet, shivering Liam waded to shore. Arthur continued standing near the edge of the water, holding out a large white towel. Liam wrapped himself up in it, then wiped his face and hair, and then handed the towel back to Arthur, who held it up as a privacy screen, even though there were no other people in the vicinity, as Liam removed his trunks and tossed them into the ground. He unfolded and replaced the wet garments with his dry pants and shirt. He took the towel from Arthur and did a better job of drying his hair as he walked from the shore to take a seat on a cluster of boulders nearby. Looking around and confirming that there were no other people, but seagulls were making a racket overhead. Soon Arthur appeared with a fresh pair of socks and his shoes. Liam used the towel again to brush off the sand from his feet before pulling on the socks and shoes. He then took a comb that had been extended to him and raked it through his light brown hair, while Arthur picked up his discarded wet clothes and towel and put them into a bag that was then placed into his backpack. "I want to hike into the hills," Liam announced before standing up and walking back to the trail. Arthur followed obediently as Liam walked and ran down rustic trails that threaded their way through the gentle rolling hills. They didn't encounter any other hikers. It was too early in the year for any of the harvesting. After the cyber attack, and without permission, people began planting fruit trees and berry bushes in the park. This was a national-wide movement, making local parks very popular during harvest time. The surplus also helped to feed the wildlife, causing hunting to also proliferate as a hobby as well as a source of meat. It tied into the new mantra that reducing the need for money was equivalent to making more of it. or maybe it was too early in the year for hikers, or maybe it was because it was a Tuesday. But all of that was of little consequence to either of them until Liam noticed a flash of orange near the top of a hill that had a beautiful view on the far side of the lake. It was a famously scenic sight, with small wooded bench nearby. Curious, he slowed his pace and peered into the thick foliage on the top of the hill. There was movement, then he could discern the orange flash that was a brightly colored clothing of a woman. She was standing at the top of the hill facing the beautiful view below, and the movements were her dancing. She was lost in the rhythm of a song that only she could hear. Her eyes were closed, her long dark hair was loose and swaying with her motions, and there was a smile on her face. A tattered backpack lay on a bench near her, but she was oblivious to everything around her, lost in the music that was entering her head by way of a special earpiece that hooked onto the back of each ear. Her simple cotton garment was of a bright floral design. It flowed with her slim, youthful body. Something stirred in Liam. He quietly watched her until Arthur caught up from behind. Liam turned and made a silent sign with his hand for him to stop. Arthur obeyed, noticing the source of Liam's interest for himself. When Liam turned back around, the girl was still dancing. She had not noticed the rustling sounds. She still swayed in the music, lifting her arms over her head. She twisted and turned while her eyes were closed tight. He could hear her humming and then singing in a low whisper. He grew closer. He wanted to hear the sound of her voice. He wanted to know what she was listening to. He wanted to touch her. He quietly took several small steps closer. He began to smell the patchouli oil that she was wearing. It was sweet and exotic, like her thick dark hair. When those fine strands of silk fell to the side, it revealed the nape of her neck. The skin there looked so soft and white. Liam was struck by the impulse to press his lips there. He grew nearer until he was standing so close that he had to change position to avoid her arms, and then she felt his hot breath on her cheek. Startled, she spun around and gasped, and there he was, his blue and gold eyes very close to hers. She backed away, but then froze in place, mesmerized by his handsome face. They locked eyes until Arthur adjusted his position and she noticed him a few feet away. Startled yet again, now by the presence of a second man, she grabbed her backpack and ran, racing down the trail away from the two strangers, but not without one last glance over her shoulder. Liam's first thought was to follow her, but he hesitated, eyeing Arthur near him. He asked, "Should I follow her?" Arthur assessed the situation. "I believe she was alarmed and would be more frightened if you pursued her." Liam continued to stare in the direction that she had disappeared in. His heart told him to follow, but his brain knew that Arthur was actually better at reading people than he was. Since the girl had taken the same trail that they had planned to use, Liam and Arthur reversed their course and walked back to the lake. Liam was quietly contemplating the earlier exchange. "She turned her head and looked back at me. Maybe she was frightened of you," he said grudgingly. "It is possible," Arthur returned, "but based on past experience, it was best that she ran away." Liam shook his head and mumbled. He ran back to the group of boulders where he had sat earlier and leaned against the largest one with his arms crossed, staring across the water. When Arthur caught up to him, he burst out, "I know what you're referring to, Arthur, and at least that was an experience." He glowered, still facing the water. "You put your life in danger," Arthur reminded. "Your father was furious and wanted to add new restrictions to your behavior." Liam quietly shook his head. Then slowly a smile crossed his lips as he remembered the incident. It had started at that very park when a different young woman had asked for a ride. She wasn't as beautiful or smelled as good as the girl that they had just met, but she was fairly young and agreeable, if not forward. Arthur would later complain to Liam's father that he had been forced to stand with his face to the corner of the transport. "Not only did you contract a venereal disease, but you were suffering with an undetermined rash for weeks." Liam chuckled to himself. Yeah, that rash was a bitch. They stood silently watching the water for several minutes. before Liam announced that the hiking was over and that they would return to their transporter. They silently walked back to the trails that Liam had previously ran, Arthur cautiously keeping pace with Liam, trying not to trip. Liam walking slower, unsuccessfully, on the lookout for the patchouli-scented female. The next morning, Liam was surprised to find his father eating breakfast. "Dad, you're home early," he said, embracing his father before seating himself at the table. "Yes, I was able to get here last night," he explained between bites of egg and ham. "In fact, I've already had a meeting with Arthur. He told me about yesterday at the park." Liam sighed and gave Arthur an angry look as he was handing him a cup of coffee. But Alan set his hand on his son's gently. "It's okay. In fact, I think we have a solution." Wearily, he looked into his father's face as he explained. "Liam, you are a young man, a young human. Of course you have urges. God knows I did at your age." Alan laughed and made eye contact with Arthur. "So I think we came up with a solution. Remember our company has developed a relationship with Ito Robotics? Well, they have an automatically correct female robot." At this point, Liam rolled his eyes. "What?" his dad questioned. "I don't want to fuck Arthur." No, we would amend the program any way you want. We could delete your personal information from the data matrix altogether, and you could let the new robot get to know you on its own." Liam looked doubtful at the plate of food that he had just been presented. "You could think of it as research for the company," Alan continued. Liam chased a bit of potato with his fork. "You could think of it as a game, or that you were going to try out cutting-edge technology. Most men would jump at the chance," Alan added after a few moments of quiet. "Well, I'll let you think about it, but I've already arranged for the newest model to be shipped here. If nothing else, you need to take a good look at it before the next company meeting this month. I've scheduled it for Friday after your quarterly physical," Alan explained. "Don't worry, Dad. I didn't get close enough to contact anything." Alan made an exasperated sound. "I just set it up at a convenient time for both of us. I needed you to be in top shape for the talks. I'm having Arthur speak too. I'm helping him draft a speech. This one is important. I want you to speak second. I've already started writing your part. Then I'll speak last and give the sales pitch." Liam nodded. He'd participated in these talks before. They were held at the university. The seminar would be live-streamed as well as in front of a large audience of businessmen, engineers, and scientists. It was an annual event. Is FemBop the important feature this year? No, Alan retorted. The main focus has a lot to do with you, actually. This year, we intend to present the idea of robotic nannies. We finally got approval for our 5-year-olds to be alone with them. Your experience will be a great asset. Liam mulled over the idea in his head. The words of the man at the theater came to mind. "It's that robot that raised a kid, and the kid." It made a knot in his stomach. What do I have to say? Well, actually, you can just reflect a little on your childhood with Arthur. Pleasant things, like the trips you've taken together, stuff like that. Those monthly physicals and counseling sessions will come in handy for data. Plus, we have other data from children who grew up with robots, but none that have the data going back to infancy as you and Arthur. Alan looked at his son. He was trying to read Liam's thoughts. He really did need his son's cooperation for the sake of company profits, and if he could encourage a relationship between Liam and a female robot, all the better for next year's seminar. Alan reached across the table and patted his son's hand again. "But that's not for 2 weeks. I should be around for a couple days. Let's have some fun." Liam smiled weakly. For some reason, he didn't feel enthusiastic about his dad's visit as usual. In fact, he was suddenly feeling kind of hot and nauseous. He pushed his plate away. "So what do you want to do?" his father continued, trying to re-energize the mood. Liam thought about it, but for some reason he was weak and wanted to go back to his room upstairs. "I don't know." Alan's face fell into a serious expression. "Are you okay? You look pale." Arthur immediately returned to the table and examined Liam, first by taking his wrist and counting his pulse, then by taking his temperature in the same fashion. Liam looked up at the robot fondly. Arthur was his faithful companion. Liam loved Arthur. But did Arthur love Liam? He then looked over at his father and wondered the same thing. His pulse is normal, his temperature seems to be elevated, and his eyes look watery. I think he should go back to bed, Arthur diagnosed. Liam nodded in agreement. When he stood up, his legs were a bit wobbly. Arthur took his arm and walked him up the staircase. Alan finished his breakfast. It was noon before Liam woke up again, feeling better and hungry. The kitchen was empty. He checked the workshop off of the transport room to find his father standing over Arthur's open back panel with a small suction in his hand. The robot was leaning over a bench with his hands resting on the floor and his head hanging upside down. Alan looked up when he heard the approaching footsteps. "Liam, are you feeling better?" he asked in a chipper voice. "Yeah, I don't know why I felt sick. I'm okay now. Maybe I stayed up too late last night," he suggested. Liam hated seeing Arthur this way, but it was his regular maintenance that Alan insisted on performing himself. Arthur was incapacitated. He was in a kind of hibernation state that allowed him to be serviced without being completely shut down. Arthur had never been shut off in Liam's memory. "I thought of a place we could go," Alan began enthusiastically. "We could fly to Vegas, get a room at that new alien casino, see the show, and tomorrow we could rent a transporter and go climb those red rocks that you like so much. We could look for petroglyphs." Liam liked that idea. "Yeah," he muttered while nodding his head. Soon a reinvigorated Arthur, as well as the father and son, were walking across the lawn to a small runway that was cut into their backyard. The company owned a small self-driving airplane. It was made to comfortably accommodate 8 passengers. Arthur deposited the luggage into the compartment in the belly of the plane while the 2 men boarded. Liam looked around himself wide-eyed. "I haven't been on here in a long time," he marveled as he explored the cabin. His father used to be around more when Liam was younger. The 3 of them would travel often. Alan taught his son to love the outdoors. Camping trips and surfing jaunts were common until he was about 12. Then, for some unknown reason, Alan became too busy for the little holidays. They became less frequent until they stopped altogether. It had been a few years since their last airplane trip. "You know," Liam began, "I think I've only been on this plane once. We had that smaller plane on our other trips." Alan nodded. He was calculating the number of years since their last airplane trip. He felt a twinge of guilt and silently vowed to take his son more often. Liam found a comfortable place in a long, narrow window. It reminded him of his favorite seat on their transporter. He sat facing the view while Arthur took a seat beside Alan at the table. The little airplane began moving slowly down a runway, then picked up speed until they were high over their house. Liam sat with his face pressed against the glass window, smiling. It was probably mid-flight before he looked around himself to see Arthur sitting still with his father, still working at something that looked like a spreadsheet that was projected from his communicator in front of him. He stood and stretched and began walking to the bathroom. It was on the way back to his seat that he decided to check the cupboards for something to snack on. But at first, all he found were animal crackers, baby wafers, and a few other brightly colored boxes of children's snacks. Frowning, he opened another cupboard and found more adult fare. He grabbed a bag of smoked nuts. Curious about the baby foods, he wondered if maybe his dad was dating a woman with children. "So, Dad, are you going out with a mom?" he jeered as he tossed himself into a seat. Alan looked up a bit alarmed. Yeah, why?" Liam had torn open a bag of nuts and was tossing them by the handful into his mouth. "Just wondering," he said, returning his attention out the window, smiling to himself. The flight was pretty uneventful. They landed in a small private airport outside of Las Vegas, where their company owned a hangar. The transporter was waiting for them. It was a newer, sleek model of the Razor that they left at home. Liam was excited to be entering the vehicle. "This is great," he cooed as he stepped inside and tried out the extra plush seating. He immediately pulled his hand out to Arthur to set him his communicator so that he could try out his favorite music on the sound system. "You don't need that," Arthur explained, waving off Arthur's outstretched hand with the communicator on it. "Just activate the hologram and pick your music. Everything is in here. You can watch the bands perform." Alan pressed a button and quickly chose his favorite tune. The center of the transporter became a stage with a wild band of musicians at its center. The music seemed to be coming from the individual instruments as well as the lead singer. "I rented a model just like this one last week when I came here for a conference." Liam leaned in closer to his father so that he could hear him better. "What conference were you at?" "Oh, very interesting, about DNA. You should look it up. It was in the same hotel that we are booked at," Alan explained. Soon they witnessed that unforgettable view of the city lights in the dark desert. As they drove into the heart of it, Liam watched the spectacular lights showing through a long transporter window. Every hotel sported a different, over-the-top themed light and hologram show. The hotel that they were to stay in was new and had huge, colorful aliens that were under fire from a Buck Rogers-style character that flew around the building shooting laser guns at them. The transporter pulled inside and dropped them off in the lobby. Liam was drawn to the casino's interior, where a hologram of a 50-foot alien was caged in the center. A circular mezzanine surrounded it. People were leaning over the balcony shooting laser guns at the thing. Liam soon found out that the guns were rented and that if you managed to hit one of the designated targets on the creature, then you received credits. Soon he had a gun and was racing up the escalator to get a better shot. Alan and Arthur watched him from the ground floor for a few minutes. Alan was trying to remember what it was like to be that excited about something as simple as a game. He was feeling old. He'd arranged for Liam's birth when he was in his mid-40s. His father had died, and it was on his deathbed that he had convinced Alan that he needed to settle down and produce an heir. "Do it before you get too old to enjoy being a father," was his dying advice. Alan had taken it to heart. Now he wished that his father could see the perfect specimen of a son that he had produced. "So, Arthur, as soon as I get back, I want you to help Liam with his speech. I want him to do something creative that features something compelling, a story about the two of you, but I also want it to demonstrate his creativity." Arthur considered this for a moment. "Do you really want him to write it?" Alan nodded. "Yes, just supervise the subject and don't let it ramble. You know how short attention spans are nowadays." "Yes. Also, Alan, you never gave me an answer about the replacement dog." Alan sighed. "You know, I just don't understand why he won't try a robo-pet. They are so popular with people of all ages. It would be great for him to have the experience with one of ours." He insisted that he wants a dog that grows old and dies. Alan shook his head. "I'll ship a robo-pet to the house for him to inspect. After a couple of weeks, if he continues to insist on a real dog, then let him get one." Arthur made a note of the instructions. That night was spent in one of the casino's clubs. Liam had chosen the show. It was a live performance of a band that his father had never heard of. It was accompanied by a spectacular light show. They spent time gambling afterward, then headed for their room, which was actually a suite with 2 large bedrooms. Arthur would spend the night in a chair connected to a special charger that Alan had brought for him to try out. The next morning, Liam awoke early. The time change had caused him to wake at dawn. He stood in the window of their 23rd floor suite, looking for a soft light that was rising sun in the distance. Naked, multicolored mountains framed its arrival. Nevada has such pretty colored dirt, he thought to himself. In the next room, Arthur woke from his hibernation when he heard Liam's approach. "Did you want me to order your breakfast?" he asked. Liam stretched and pressed a menu button on a wall-mounted monitor. Maybe something different like Eggs Benedict, coffee, and orange juice. he announced as he walked away from the monitor. He could have simply touched the options on the pressure-sensitive screen to place the order, but that wasn't something that he was used to doing. Arthur always took care of those things. Investigating the other gadgets in a room took his time until breakfast arrived. Soon Alan was also awake, and the threesome were on their way to the location that Liam had chosen, Grapevine Valley. I found a really cool hiking site, he explained. People record their trips so others can follow step by step if they want. The fisheye lens that they use allows the viewer to look up and around while hiking. That valley is full of petroglyphs. I'm surprised we've never went there. The sky was overcast, but undeterred, they summoned the Razor and were shortly pulling off the highway and into a dirt trail. The desert road snaked through the valley of gray walk walls, while large native symbols etched on the near the tops of the mountains like billboards. Finally, they came to a rock plateau where the trail dead-ended into the base of an enormous pile of boulders. Craning their necks to take in the view, the three disembarked. I believe that we need to walk this way, Liam nodded with his head. Around the mountain, then between those two. The petroglyphs should be on the back side of the mountain, he explained, pointing in the distance. Arthur adjusted his backpack that he was wearing and tilted his head up. It looks like it might rain. Liam shrugged, then jogged ahead. Alan stayed back with Arthur. We aren't going for that far from the transporter, he assured him. But the walk did take longer than anyone had expected. Liam disappeared behind a mountain long before Arthur and Alan were near it. After several minutes, he came back out, motioning for them to hurry. You guys have to see this. It's amazing, he shouted to them before returning to the far side of the mountain. When Alan and Arthur finally turned the corner between the mountains, they were also impressed by the ancient graffiti. It was everywhere. And there, in the middle of it, was Liam, several feet off the ground, climbing the boulders. Alan sighed and shook his head. I wish I had that much energy again. They admired the art from the sandy ground. Alan began looking up some of the symbols to determine their meaning. It was a fun hour or so until Arthur deciphered the largest symbols near the top, then quickly walked over to Alan. Those symbols, he began, the ones that look like lightning bolts? Yes, Alec acknowledged, following Arthur's gesture. They are near those wavy lines? Okay, I see them. That is a warning. It means beware, this valley floods when it rains. That was when Alan looked up to see the dark, angry clouds over them. He called out to Liam, who had disappeared into a small cave. He shouted louder and fumbled with his communicator. Arthur pulled Liam's communicator out of his pocket to show Alan. He doesn't like to have stuff in his pockets, Arthur explained. Alan looked at Arthur and sighed. He knew that the robot hadn't mastered climbing. That was one of the things that he was supposed to practice that day. He had made adjustments to Arthur's ankles the day before, but all of it was untested. Okay, let's try climbing up there, Alan suggested. Arthur removed his unwieldy backpack, and then they began their ascent, calling out Liam's name the whole time. Then the wind picked up, and it began to rain. The two carefully chose a path of small boulders, grabbing onto the trees and scrub to pull themselves up. The rocks were becoming slippery. The wind was beginning to howl as it weaved behind the stones. Arthur slipped and fell, catching his chin on the edge of a rock and causing it to rip his latex skin. He slid partway down. You okay? Alan called out to him. Yes, but there is damage to my right foot, Arthur explained. Just stay there, Alan commanded as he pushed closer to the area that he had seen the sun disappear into. It was about that time that Liam appeared on the ledge above his father. Now the rain was coming down in torrents. Alan called out to him. His words were lost in the storm, but Liam could see that they were having trouble. He could see Arthur laying on the rock farther down the mountain. He began to descend, not to aid his father, but to help Arthur, who appeared to be the one in need. Alan looked on, a bit hurt to see his son make quick work of the mountain, climbing past him and then to stoop over the alien robot. All of them were soaked and dirty. He couldn't hear the exchange of words between his son and the robot, but he watched as Liam helped Arthur up and down the mountain. One of Arthur's feet appeared to be dangling between steps, as if it no longer had the ability to lift the foot up. With Liam's help, the two soon made it to the slippery, wet sand and were headed towards the transporter. Alan intentionally slid part the way down to catch up with the pair. The strong winds made the walking difficult. The midday sky was dark, and the sheets of rain rendered all their view to the other side of the pass invisible. Yet in the distance, Alan could see his son with his arm around and under the robot's arm, helping him forward. "Liam!" Alan shouted and pulled on his son's arm when he finally caught up with him. "Leave him here. We need to get to the transporter. We can come back for him after the storm." Liam looked horrified at his father and shook his head. "No!" "He'll be okay," his father insisted, but Liam shook off his father's grasp and continued with the robot with his awkward dangling gait. Frustrated with his son's stubbornness, Alan pressed past the two and jogged towards the plateau where the transporter was parked. It was perilously near the edge of the rock. The wind was pushing it, as water was swirling around it. Alan feared that it could be washed over the edge. He pulled his communicator out of his pocket, and from a distance he directed the vehicle towards the more sheltered inside area of the parking lot. He took a look back over his shoulder to see his son and robot progressing forward in the melee of rain, wind, and mud. Aggravated, he relented to his son's irrational behavior and doubled back to help him assist the damaged robot to their vehicle. When the three finally made it to the top of the plateau, it was a race to navigate the vehicle out of the flooded valley before they were washed away and down the rock cliff. But with Liam, they were out of the mountains and back on the muddy trail to the highway. Alan turned to his son angrily. "What were you thinking? You risked our lives for a piece of equipment?" Liam was sitting on the couch next to a dazed Arthur, who was wet with his face ripped open to expose some bits of metal. Liam was trying to dab the water away from his circuits with a dry jacket that he had left there. He looked over at his father with his hair dripping into his eyes and the adrenaline waning. "What do you mean?" he blurted out. "He's not equipment. He's my friend. I couldn't leave him there." A crack in his voice embarrassed him and made him look away from his father and return to the job of caring for the robot. But Alan was relentless. He moved over to his son and pulled his shoulder back to force him to look at him. "Liam, he is a robot. Even if his body was lost, we would just download his program into another body. He's not human. You are being irrational." Liam looked at his father's face. Some of the wetness was tears. He had no retort. His brain knew that his father was right, but his heart knew that he could never have left his most devoted friend, the one he loved the most, behind. Alan shook his head, then returned to a seat in front of the monitor on his desk. But as soon as the screen across from him, his son was obviously too attached to the robot. He considered if the problem was Arthur's programming. Then he wondered if the effect was beneficial to the sale of the nanobots. He would have to ponder this question. The next day, Arthur boarded their private plane with a limp as well as a scar from where his skin had been bonded back together. Alan had done the best at repairs with his emergency resources. Permanent fixes would be applied later at his workshop. There was little talk about the events of the previous day. No one wanted to cause any unpleasantness. When the plane landed, Alan said goodbye without disembarking, claiming that he had work to do in their West Coast office. The father and son embraced awkwardly. "I'll be back soon," he promised. When they approached the front door of the house, they found a note that directed them to a large crate inside an outbuilding. It was the female robot. Liam sighed and left Arthur to unpack and set the new machine up. He didn't want to cause his father any more grief, but he had no desire to inspect the thing, zero curiosity. Instead, he went to his VR arena and practiced tennis. When hunger finally forced him out, he found a beautiful animated life-size doll sitting at the dining room table. He ignored her and sat down at his usual seat, which happened to be across from her. Her eyes and head followed him. "Hello," she started in a pleasant female voice. "Do you come here often?" Liam just stared at her dead eyes for a moment, then shouted, "I live here, you stupid fuck!" Arthur rushed out of the kitchen and into the dining room as quick as his damaged foot allowed. "Your father deleted all your information from her data matrix. She doesn't know you," he explained. Liam pursed his lips and took a deep breath, trying to control his temper. While the new robot appeared to be watching on with interest, she was actually trying to read his face. "I'm sorry," she cooed in a soothing voice. "Did I make you angry?" Liam crossed his arms and glared at her. Then he heard a shuffling sound coming from the kitchen. A dog barked. He pushed his chair out and looked around Arthur to see a mechanical dog. Disappointed, he threw his head back and focused on the ceiling. "Is there something I can do to make it better?" the female voice asked in a seductive way, and looked around Arthur to see a mechanical dog. Disappointed, he threw his head back and focused on the ceiling. "Is there something I can do to make it better?" the female voice asked in a seductive way. Upon hearing this, Liam forcefully pushed his chair out and stood up. He grabbed a salt shaker from the center of the table and threw it as hard as he could at the robot's head. It made a loud thud and caused her head to jerk backward. Then he stomped off back to his virtual reality room. "I'm sorry. Did I do something wrong?" he heard her ask before the door slammed shut. Liam was a couple hours into his very violent war game when there came a message from his father to meet him in a VR conference room. He paused his game and sat down and took several deep breaths before he clicked on the icon that transported him to his father's office. His father's avatar was sitting at a long black enamel table, and Liam was sitting across from him. "Liam," his father's voice sounded youthful, "what do you think of Katie? I made her look like Gigi LePew. Isn't she beautiful?" Liam decided that apparently his father hadn't heard about the salt shaker incident. He carefully chose to focus on the Gigi reference. "Yes, very pretty. Is she officially a Gigi replica? Did you sign a deal with her people?" "Yes, and we are also working out the details with a few other celebrities as well. It should be a great selling point. So what do you think about her interactions? Did she seem lifelike? I think it's important that we are able to fool people who aren't aware that she is in fact a robot." "Yes, very lifelike. I'm sure you are already aware that I deleted your personal information from her database. I wanted the two of you to get to know each other organically." Liam thought that the use of the word organically was an odd choice, but continued to listen with the appearance of interest. "Arthur said that there was some damage on her forehead and neck. When I asked him how it happened, he said, 'I don't know,' which, as you know, is the answer he gives when he's been instructed not to answer. Do you know what that's about?" Liam was surprised at his father's honesty about the "I don't know" syntax, and even more surprised when Arthur had used it without being instructed to do so. "I don't know either," he lied. "Oh well," his father continued brightly, "it probably happened during the shipping. Also, what about the robo-pet? I named him Sneakers, but of course you can change that if you want." Liam nodded and wanted to mention that he still wanted a real dog, but decided not to push the issue at present. "The dog is cute. He barks like a real dog. In fact, he kind of fooled me at first. Well, the barking part anyway," he added grudgingly. "Good, good," his father seemed pleased. "I also wanted you to start working on your speech. I instructed Arthur to help you come up with something creative that highlights your experience of growing up with Arthur. Like I explained to you, this year we are pushing the robot nannies since we are finally have approval to advertise them as safe to supervise children 5 and over. It's going to be a booming market." "Yeah, I bet it will be," Liam conceded. The rest of the conversation was filled with technical jargon and discussion of the company. He knew that as an adult, with his education completed, he would now be expected to contribute more to the family business. Robotics, engineering, and programming were his areas of interest. But the business side, advertising and the pushing of new products, wasn't. He accepted that he needed to stretch himself and become more outgoing for the good of the company. It was only fair. His speech would be his chance to make an extra effort. After the meeting, Liam decided that he needed to be more grown-up about the company's new products. So he took his gloves off and his goggles off, and he stalked out of the VR room, intent on giving the new machine a more rational inspection. but that did not include having sex with him. When Arthur noticed him walking towards the workshop where he was still working on Katie's repairs, he immediately shielded the new robot with his own body. "Don't worry, Arthur, I come in peace," Liam reassured him. "I'm here to inspect the new products, that robo-dog too," he explained while moving past him to look at the robot's exposed circuitry. She was laying face down on a long bench where Arthur was trying to replace a couple bits of her neck where two of the delicate pieces of her metal spine were bent. "So she came with replacement parts?" Liam asked with a bit of malice in his voice. "No, these are my spare parts," Arthur explained. Liam looked down at Arthur's damaged foot. "Why don't you fix your ankle first?" "My ankle does not have priority." Liam looked at Arthur's face for a moment. Yes, it does have priority. You are important, more important than this new machine. As soon as you are finished here, I want you to fix yourself. You have priority," he stated firmly. Arthur nodded that he understood his new hierarchy of priorities. As soon as Katie was back on her feet, Liam ushered her out of the workshop while Arthur began repairs on the damaged ankle. Then Liam did something that he had rarely done before. He found his way to the kitchen and made himself a sandwich. It wasn't made with the precision that Arthur's sandwiches had, but Liam decided that it was something that he needed to do for himself more often, giving Arthur more time to work on higher priority projects. Next, he gave Katie directions that put her through a few tests to see if her former glitches in Arthur's program had been corrected in hers. He made notes. Then he did the same for Sneakers. Stupid name, he told himself, but left it. When he finished, he went to his office and sent the notes off to his father as well as the company's tech department. Then he gave his speech some thought. His father wanted him to do something creative, so he decided to try his hand at an essay, something close to his heart, the last day in the life of his dog, Ernest. The next day, a doctor came to give Liam his monthly physical. There was a designated room in the house that was used for these examinations. It was equipped with whatever the doctor might need. The physicals were thorough, and the information was recorded with the same diligence that it had been every month of Liam's life. Liam's data was paramount to the company. The same afternoon, a different doctor arrived. This one was a psychiatrist. Again, this was another monthly exam that was recorded and stored as data. It was such a common occurrence that Liam wasn't even aware of how unusual it was for someone's health to be so closely monitored. He had nothing to contrast it with. Later that evening, as Liam had spent the rest of his day working on his essay, he was surprised to find a package that Arthur had deposited on the table in his room. He opened it to find an electric blue musical suit. It was of an even better quality than the one that he had seen on the street performer. Excitedly, he pulled it out of the box and tried it on. At first it was a bit stiff, but as soon as the flexible fabric was next to his warm skin, a liquid between the two layers of super hydrophonic materials was activated and charged the suit's musical relays, resulting in sound. The more vigorously Liam moved, the louder the sounds. Liam soon figured out how to change the tempo with a program that interacted with his suit wirelessly. He played with his new musical toy throughout the night till he had invented a dance that he shared with Arthur the next morning. "Do you think that this is something creative that I could share at the seminar?" he asked Arthur enthusiastically. "I will consult you with your father," Arthur replied. "Well, I think we should try it out this evening. I want to perform on the sidewalk," he explained. Arthur considered this for a moment. It would be a way to test its effects on others. We could monitor their interest. Liam had been thinking about this. "I'll bring a hat for people to put money in. The amount of money I get ranks the merits of my performance," he reasoned. Arthur agreed, although neither of them knew what a reasonable amount of money was for a street performer. At dusk, they found themselves walking down a city sidewalk. Liam was wearing the suit with a blue top hat. He felt awkward in his noisy new outfit, and they were getting attention. This was something Liam usually avoided, but since the attention was laughter and interest in the functions of the suit, it was different, fun. Most of his admirers were other young adults. Some were girls. It was like he was in on the joke. Finally, he was one of them. When he and Arthur came to an area where they had encountered the street performer on their last visit, they decided to try out Liam's new dance. First, he made a big gesture of setting his hat on the pavement in front of himself. Then he did a kind of high-pitched pirouette. A crowd quickly gathered around him to watch. Liam noted a cute, dark, curly-haired girl with another young woman that was paying especially close attention to the performance. Arthur noticed them too, but he was paying attention to the girl's companion and began sending her messages. As the performance unfolded, it was clear that Liam was more adept at dancing than the musical part, but his physique and athletic prowess overshadowed his lack of musical talent. The crowd watched with interest while Liam was watching the little dark-haired girl. Then Arthur noticed her nudge her companion and whisper something in her ear. After that, the taller, light-skinned companion stepped forward and dropped a bill into Liam's hat. This made him smile and dance with more vigor. The dance ended with him jumping into the air and doing a backflip. The small crowd cheered. He took a bow, making eye contact with a pretty little girl who had clapped with enthusiasm. For an awkward moment, the two just stood and stared at one another. Arthur broke the spell by stepping forward and picking up the top hat. Sadly, it only contained the one bill. "I'm afraid you only have one fan," he announced. But Liam was too preoccupied with the one fan to be disappointed. He plucked the bill out of the hat and stepped forward to hand it back to the girl. "Could you sign this for me?" he asked shyly. "I want to add it to my collection since you are my first fan." The young girl giggled as he bowed again in a chivalrous way. Arthur noted how the suit seemed to give him confidence. The young girl meekly reached out and grasped the bill as Liam noticed her delicate fingers. There was a brief moment of awkwardness as the girl didn't know where and how, with what, to sign her name. Then Liam's face lit up with a glorious idea. "How about if we visit my favorite coffee shop and I buy you the best chocolate cream croissant on the planet?" The girl giggled, looking up at her companion, then at Liam, and nodded in the affirmative. "It's just a few doors down." He made an exaggerated motion in the direction of the coffee shop. She smiled and accepted the elbow that he had extended towards her. Her companion and Arthur followed a few steps behind. Inside the coffee shop, they took one of Liam's favorite tables next to a big glass window. The two sat across from one another on the inside seats, their eyes rarely straying from one another as the companions stood next to the table, waiting for instructions. "So, do you know what you want, or would you like me to order for you?" Liam asked, leaning towards her. I've never been here before. I'd like a coffee and one of those chocolate cream croissants." Liam gave Arthur their order, and the girl motioned for her friend to sit in the chair beside her. Liam gave Arthur the order, and the girl motioned for her friend to sit in the chair beside her. Then she took a pen from her and began writing a name on the bill that she still held in her hand. She gave the pen back to her friend and handed Liam the bill. He studied it for a moment, noting her fluffy, curly writing. "Laura," he said aloud. She hunched up her shoulders a bit with embarrassment. "So what's your name?" "Liam," he said in a dream. "And what is this collection that you were referring to?" "Oh, nothing really. I just have a collection of money that people have given me over the years, mostly birthdays and stuff. Most of it's from my dad's friends and our employees. I'm not sure how it started, but your bill is now my favorite." Before long, Arthur was back with a tray containing 2 drinks and 2 croissants. Liam looked over at Laura's companion, noting her lack of refreshments, but then up at Arthur. But Laura interceded. "Oh, she doesn't eat." Before this, Liam hadn't given her much attention. Now he suspected that she was a robot. Arthur took a seat next to Liam. "She's one of ours," he explained. "Arthur 54862. "Oh," Liam exclaimed. "An early download," he noted aloud. "Oh, do you work for the robotics company?" Laura asked. Liam nodded. He wasn't interested in muddying up the waters by explaining that he was the company. That type of honest candor had put him in unpleasant spots before. Either the person didn't believe him, or they became too friendly, so he simply replied, "Yes." "What do you do?" "I'm an engineer. I'm in my 3rd year of computer science at university." This made Liam brighten. "Great, coding is one of my favorite pastimes. But how did you come by your robot?" "My parents bought her from an estate sale when I was 12. Her name is Pamela. Now they won't let me leave the house without her." She leaned in towards Liam as she was putting the pastry in her hand apart. "She's proficient in martial arts," Laura confided. The two young people began discussing music and videos until their pastries were gone and their cups were empty. Then Pamela interrupted their intimate conversation with a message from Laura's mother that she needed to be home. Liam and Arthur walked the two to the curb where their transport was waiting. Both humans vowed to meet up again soon as the transport door slid shut. Liam was all smiles. The day had been a total success for him. On the way home, they discussed Pamela. Arthur's special status gave him unlimited access to the programming of all Arthur robots. He explained to Liam that he had found a disturbing hack in her program. Starting with Arthur, all downloads of the program included a bit of historical data. One of those bits was to establish that Ian Moore was the creator. This fact was hard-coded and wasn't to be altered, but it was. In Pamela's historical data, her creator was John Davidson. "I know about this John Davidson," Arthur began. "He was a former employee who had offered unlawful alterations to our program. I corrected hers and explained the corrections to her, and that Ian Moore was her creator, not John Davidson, and he was an imposter. She now knows that I am Ian Moore's first creation and that she is number 54862. Liam listened quietly, marveling at the righteous indignation that Arthur seemed to exude while explaining the hack, and to think that all of this happened silently as Laura and he were drinking coffee. In a world of no humans, these robotic beings would be telepathic. The next day at breakfast, Liam was given the bad news that his father didn't feel that a musical dance would be appropriate for the conference. Arthur had explained to Alan that the suit gave Liam confidence and made him happy, and his dance showed creativity. But Alan wouldn't have any of it. So Liam returned to work on his essay. The news was disappointing, but Liam's mind was preoccupied with the thought of Laura and how they were planning a date weekend after the seminar. So he took it all in stride. Plus he felt that the essay was shaping up nicely. That day, when Arthur brought Liam afternoon coffee to his office, he noted that Katie, the $1 million prototype, was in a standing position against the wall in a hibernated state, and that Liam had used her as a hat rack for his blue top hat. Sneakers was also disabled and flipped upside down on the floor beside her. When Arthur asked him about it, Liam explained that he had found a position that the robo-pet was unable to get upright from, and that he had reported it to the technical department. Arthur interpreted this as a sign of Liam's disinterest in the robotic girl and dog. He knew his report on it would make Alan unhappy. On the day of the seminar, Alan flew in later than anticipated, but he confirmed with his son that the essay was finished and that Arthur had given it a read. He wasn't overly excited that the story was about a real dog. He would have rather that Liam told a story about the virtues of an animal who didn't grow old and die. But he decided that the audience might conclude that for themselves, since the story ended with the sad death of the mortal pet. The three rode to the university together. Their conference was being held at the largest, grandest auditorium on the campus. The room was packed. Many people who would have liked to attend were relegated to watch online. A large monitor hung over the stage, magnifying each speaker so that they could be seen from the farthest row. Everyone was dressed in dark, form-fitting suits, including Alan, Arthur, and Liam. At the appropriate time, a curtain was drawn back to show them sitting in comfortable chairs a few feet to the right and behind the podium, where a youthful, middle-aged woman stood as the monitor. She gave a bit of background information about Ian Moore organization, and her last words being, "And now I'd like to introduce you to a representative." This was Arthur's cue. He stepped up to the podium and thanked the host before starting his prepared speech. He scanned the audience in front of him slowly, trying to make eye contact with everyone in the room, just as Alan had instructed him. Then, when the room became silent, he began, "Thank you for being here tonight. As a member of the Ian Moore organization from the beginning, I can attest to the phenomenal growth that it's had from its inception. Ian Moore's original program, Arthur 1, has grown to be the single most powerful search engine in the world. If you can't get the answers to your questions from Arthur 1, then you don't understand what you are asking." To this, the audience roared with laughter. And the learning never ends. Each version of Arthur 1's program that is downloaded is smarter than the one before. And now, as these versions grow and develop their own personalities from individual experiences that their programs encounter, those versions are now trading information with one another. Versions of Arthur 1 are downloaded into toys and appliances as well as robots. But it is about the robots that we wanted to focus on tonight. Arthur stopped and scanned the room again before he continued. The Ian Moore organization has recently teamed up with Ito Robotics. We have now an amazing assortment of lifelike automatons. Downloaded with customized versions of Arthur 1, these robots can be used for a large variety of tasks. For example, if you need someone to help your elderly parents, then you can get a version of Arthur 1 that is slow and gentle in movement, observant to danger signs like the tiny symptoms of a stroke. If they notice these warning signs, they verify it by measuring pulse and other factors. If need be, they will contact an ambulance. Plus, they can be chaperone to an elderly person who might get confused about their medicine or how to get home. They also cook and clean, he added. While this market represents a substantial part of our production line, today I wanted to tell you about a more exciting news. Arthur stopped for another dramatic pause before continuing. We recently received licensing for our robots to autonomously chaperone children 5 years old and over. Robotic nannies have arrived. The audience erupted in applause. When the noise died down, he continued, "Our newly approved applications are now available that will let your parents set the rules for your version of Arthur 1, and unlike human nannies, your robo-nanny will never falter from those rules. And even more exciting, parents have the opportunity to decide what kind of adult they want their child to grow up to be, and we can help them alter programming to encourage the child to develop those traits." Arthur stopped again and let the audience consider his last statement before asking, "How many of you work so hard that you don't have time for a spouse, let alone a child?" Many heads nodded in agreement. Think of it, a nanny that raises your child the way you want your child raised, without jealousy, anger, or deception. Arthur paused again, waiting for the room to become silent before announcing, "And as the nanny for Ian Moore's grandson for the last 23 years, I feel that I have done an excellent job. I am Arthur, and this is the man who I helped to bring into adulthood." At this point, Arthur gestured towards Liam, who knew this to be his cue to stand. "So, I am proud to introduce you to Liam Moore." There was a roar of applause as Liam stood proud and smiled, then took the podium. He shook Arthur's hand before the robot took back his seat beside Alan. Liam tried to appear relaxed, but it was always scary for him when he saw all the faces staring at him. He stood silently after looking up and around the room as instructed, but then he stood with his eyes downcast while waiting for the audience to quiet. Liam was naturally shy, but with instruction he could now fake his way through many a seminar, although he would never get used to it. His youth, his handsome face, and buff physique made him instantly someone that everyone wanted to know, and his quiet and reserved disposition made him even more likable. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "I am not a robot." Everyone chuckles. "I am Liam Moore, Ian Moore's grandson and heir to his empire." After this he stopped and waited for the noise to cease before continuing. I would like to publicly thank Arthur for all that he's done over the years. He turned to face the robot while saying, for the outstanding companionship, the guidance. He turned back to the audience. And believe me, when my dad laid down a restriction, Arthur never budged. After a few laughs, but seriously, the education I got from someone who literally knows everything, and from the perspective of facts, not superstition, not confusion, facts. And he always had the most recent information on all subjects. He also took me to swimming lessons and Boy Scouts. I was an Eagle Scout by 17. And so much more that I could never express how much Arthur has meant to me my whole life. In fact, my father tells me that Arthur named me. He asked him to come up with something to incorporate our family history. So Arthur came up with Liam, Ian Allen Moore. He then turned to face Arthur. Thank you. I think the name suits me much better than Dad's first choice of Bob. Arthur nodded agreement while the audience laughed. My father asked me to do something creative for his seminar. Well, my first choice would have been to dance in my musical suit. Liam stopped for a bit of unexpected laughter before continuing. But instead, I decided to write an essay. I chose a subject that was near to my heart, the last day in the life of my dog, Ernest. Alan was leaning in a bit. He was trying to control a look of disapproval. Liam continued. Ernest was the best dog that ever was. I can't remember life before him, and I'm still sad about life without him. He was a big, fluffy golden retriever with intelligent eyes, gentle disposition, and always a bit stinky. He paused for some laughter. It didn't matter how often we bathed him, he added frankly. He loved to go hiking as much as I did. I can remember countless days of us running together, jumping across fallen trees and wading streams. But he grew old. It was difficult for him to keep up with me when I ran. He would get tired and just sit down. We would have to take a break with him. He began setting our pace on the trails. He was even slower than Arthur. He stopped and looked up, smiling. Luckily, he couldn't see his father behind him, shaking his head. Sometimes I'd leave him to rest with Arthur while I ran. It always made him sad. He hated to not be included in my runs, but he had grown too old and too weak to follow. It was when I came back to the bench where I had left the two of them to rest when I noticed that he was laying down and panting. It wasn't hot out, but he was having problems breathing. The veterinarian later told me that he was probably having a heart attack, but at the time, all I knew is that he was sick, and we were more than a mile in on the trail. Arthur offered to carry him, but he never holds him right. He looked up at the audience again. It's not his fault. It's just because he's a robot, so his arms aren't as soft and warm as humans. He clarified before continuing. Behind him, Alan gritted his teeth and gazed at the floor. At first I ran with him, but I noticed that the jerking motion was making him more uncomfortable and that he was whining. So I slowed down and held him with more care. Liam was doing his best to hold back tears from the memory. Then he stopped whining. He stopped panting. He looked like he was sleeping. So I slowed down to walk, and I carried his limp body in my arms, and as I hiked back to the transport, I realized that my pace had lulled him into a last deep sleep. With those last words, Liam turned and sat down, afraid to look up, that everyone would see his tears. The audience applauded him. Liam had forgotten to introduce his father, so Alan stood up to the podium and introduced himself. "Thank you, Liam," Alan announced, half turning towards his son, who looked back sheepishly. He could tell by his father's tone that he wasn't happy. It surprised him. He meant to make him proud. Feeling frazzled, he looked over at Arthur, who was sitting very composed, watching Alan, then the audience. Liam tried to imitate him. "I'm so proud of my son. His recent graduation and now helping to run the company. He is such an asset. I'm sure my father would have been proud as well." Alan cleared his throat to compose himself. "My father would also be happy that we've kept the Ian Moore organization a private, family-owned company. No stockholders that are pressing profit over substance, no threat of hostile takeover so that we can spend our energies on artificial intelligence, not looking over our shoulders at a possible upset to our business structure. We have remained a strong and independent, relevant, and viable. Arthur 1 has remained the world's most powerful search engine for over a decade, and it's only getting more powerful. Our robots have become a staple in every scientist's lab around the world. Our children, spouses, and elderly family members can now live and travel in safety and security with their robot companions. And now, even the youngest members of our family can be cared for and nurtured by our ever-alert robo-nannies. All of this, and robo-pets and toys too. The list of Arthur applications is always increasing. He paused for a moment and announced, I could stand here and list the virtues of our many products, but you can read about them online. So, are there any questions? With that, several hands went up. Alan pointed to a man holding a tablet. He stood up. Yes, my question has to do with Liam. You said that he had completed his university education under the tutelage of Arthur? Alan nodded. The reporter continued. I ran his essay through an app. It was rated as having been written by the intellect and maturity level of a 7th grader. Alan froze for a moment. Did you say 7th graduate level? The man looked embarrassed. No, 7th grade. It was written at the maturity level of a 12 to 13-year-old. My question is, can a child raised and educated by a machine mature properly? Alan stood for several moments, stone-faced, trying to come up with an answer. Liam is an engineering and math major, not English. I'm afraid his essay writing needs a little polishing. But you can read the data from the psychological testing. It goes back to his first year. He laughed nervously. Liam was hurt that the essay that he had worked on so hard was so poorly rated, but he continued his Arthur imitation, smiling broader as his father laughed. Next question, he said, pointing at another hand without answering the first question. A woman stood up. My question is also for Liam. I wondered if he ever felt like his life was a science experiment. Alan went pale. No, I'm sure he doesn't, and I don't feel that those personal questions are appropriate. Does anyone have a technical question? Liam sat stiff and pale with a strange smile on his face, and the knot in his stomach was returning. Alan pointed in the direction of yet another waving hand. I have a technical question. I wondered, how does Liam interact with your other children? The information that you provide doesn't talk about family dynamics. How does your robot-raised child interact with your wife and children on the West Coast? These words were a shock to Liam. Other children, wife and children on the West Coast. What were these people talking about, he wondered. Alan was ashen. I think we need to get to the real tech questions, not gossip and criticisms of my son. Are there any scientists here with a question? Liam's head was spinning. He started to add up the evidence, his father's preoccupation with their West Coast office, the infrequent visits, the children's snacks in the airplane. He suddenly got hot, and the wave of nausea made him abruptly jump up and run off the stage to vomit. Arthur followed. Although Alan had instructed him to remain on stage, his prime directive, caring for his ward, was priority. Soon he found Liam, looking in vain for a bathroom after making a mess in the hall. He put his arms across Liam's shoulders and led him to a washroom. Liam looked up into the robot's face with gratitude. What would he do without Arthur? Inside the washroom, Arthur led him into one of the stalls. He helped him kneel in front of the toilet. He located towels and soaked one with cold water and pressed it against Liam's head until the vomiting stopped. Liam rolled over from his knees to sit on the marble floor. He looked over at Arthur. What were they talking about? Does Dad have a wife and children on the West Coast? Arthur looked away. I don't know. There it was. Confirmation. Liam felt weak and confused. He knew that Arthur wasn't able to give him the answers he needed. He leaned against the wall of the stall and comforted himself the same way he had since he was a child, by wrapping his arms around his knees and rocking. He didn't understand why this helped, but it did. Several minutes went by before Liam could stand and let Arthur assist him to the washing of his face, cleaning up the front of his shirt, and combing his hair. Together they walked to the green room where they had been early in preparation for the seminar. After Liam had a seat and a glass of water, he assured Arthur that he was better and that he should return on stage without him. Sitting alone, Liam couldn't help but go over the details of the seminar. He had started to fall apart when he read the essay. He scolded himself for being such a poor writer. It never was his strong suit. But did he really have the intellect of a 12-year-old? Then the questions. Did he feel like his life was a science experiment? Should he? Were the monthly physicals and talks with the therapist just data? He didn't know what other children experienced. He had nothing to compare his upbringing with. But the part that really had him in knots was the idea that his father had a whole other life away from him, a secret from him. Why? Was he afraid to have his other family around him? Was he afraid that the outside contacts would ruin the result of his experiment? He wanted answers. He needed answers. It wasn't long before Alan and Arthur returned to the same room. Alan was still angry. He was venting at Arthur. How could you have approved that essay? How did it not occur to you that it needed to be run through a literary app? They are everywhere, so common. How could you not think to do this? Arthur tried to answer each question in turn. You specified that you wanted Liam to use his creativity to showcase his virtues. And the story that he presented did exhibit compassion, and carrying the large animal out of the forest by himself was a heroic feat. I do acknowledge that I omitted checking the grade level of the piece. It did not occur to me. As far as Liam's maturity level, as I explained to you before, I believe his maturity could be the result of growing up without a tribe. It was after this exchange that Alan noticed his son. Are you okay? Liam nodded. He had been quietly listening to them discuss him as though he too were a machine. But now was his chance to speak up. Dad, what were they talking about? Other family. Alan sighed and then tried to respond calmly. Liam, I didn't think you would be interested. They have nothing to do with you and I. You, me, Arthur, we are a family. Well, my wife and I have another family, which has no impact on you. He took a seat next to Liam and leaned in closer to him. See, I didn't want to bother you with the ups and downs of my other life. Why would I want to do that to you? Liam made a gesture to him. So you are a member of both families, but I am not? Well, that's one way of putting it, I suppose. But after you were born, I made you the president of Ian Moore Organization. Your name is on the deed to the house and everything in it. Don't worry, my other children will never have a legal say in any of it. Liam listened, but his father seemed to have changed the subject to something less abstract. He wasn't really answering the question. He wasn't addressing that thing that made another knot in Liam's stomach. How many children do you have? He asked sheepishly. 2. One is 11, the other is 8. Liam did some math in his head and then looked at his father. So they are the reason that you quit coming to see me. They are the reason you quit taking me places. Alan went pale. I had more obligations after I was married, but Arthur took you places. Arthur's not my dad, he cried before jumping up and running out of the room. He wasn't sure where he was going, but he needed to get out of that room, out of that building, away from his father. And he knew that if Arthur was with him, then his father would be able to track him, to see him through Arthur's eyes. So he ran fast, faster than Arthur could run. He exited the building by way of an emergency door. Alarms began to sound, but he didn't care. He just needed to get out. He found a sidewalk and he ran as fast as he could, tears blinding him. He didn't know where he was, but the running, it felt good to him. It made him quit thinking. He was free. He couldn't stop. Back at the university, Alan and Arthur had summoned the transporter. They knew that Liam had left the building by the back door, but Liam wasn't carrying a communicating device, so they couldn't track him through GPS. Instead, Alan was on his computer, communicating with Arthur 1 so that he could access the city's video cameras. Soon he found him, running towards the outskirts of the city. Alan struck the transporter to drive them to that direction. That was when Arthur offered some advice. "Alan, do you think that Liam might need time alone?" Alan looked over at the robot thoughtfully. "What should we do then?" Arthur was sitting in the chair next to him. "I think that we should monitor him from a distance and make sure that he is safe, but allow him time to process all the new information by himself." Alan sat back in his chair and sighed. "I think you're right." Arthur was such an intricate part of his life that it didn't occur to him that he was taking parenting advice from a machine. And besides, he knew that Arthur was better at reading people than he was, especially when it came to his son. Meanwhile, Liam had run out a sidewalk. He stopped and looked around himself. He was in a residential area, and an enormous old tree stood near where the pavement ended. Ancient 2- and 3-story homes with lawns of newly planted wheat surrounded him. The sky was dimming with the setting sun, and Liam could not locate where he was. He tried to determine the direction of south, where his house was, but then decided that it didn't matter. He looked up at the pole of the street light that was slowly coming on. There was also a camera at the top of the pole. He wondered if his father was looking at him at that moment. He moved to the edge of the street, where a caravan of transporters quietly passed by him. He was walking and taking in the scenery around himself. He wondered about the people living in those homes, those big, stately homes, some of them over 200 years old. He noticed a group of young boys walking together on the sidewalk on the other side of the street, dribbling a basketball and laughing. He wished that he was one of them. They turned into a small neighborhood park that featured a basketball court. He wondered what they would think if he asked to play. Then he looked down at himself, his soiled shirt and suit, his expensive leather shoes. What would they think? He continued walking, taking in the sights, until he came to a small bridge that covered a river that ran under the street. The water level was high from the snow melt and was running swiftly. He stopped and watched the rushing water. It was so peaceful. He pushed himself into the side of the bridge and sat there with his feet dangling over, mesmerized by the movement of the water. He slowly became overwhelmed with the urge to jump down into the water. But then there was a hand on his upper arm. He looked over and saw Arthur. He smiled at his friend, his faithful, constant companion. He felt as if he were in a dream that Arthur had joined him in. Arthur helped him off the concrete ledge of the bridge. He hadn't noticed, but the robot had been walking behind him since he'd slowed his pace. Then he saw that transport pulled up beside them. He looked alarmed at Arthur, shaking his head and pulling away. He knew that his father would be inside, and he didn't want to get inside of it with him. But before he could pull away and break into a run, the transporter pulled away. "I've summoned the razor. It should be here shortly," Arthur explained. Liam let out a breath that he didn't know he was holding. Then he and his robot companion began walking side by side down the darkened residential street. The air had just the right amount of chill in it. It helped calm him. "Arthur, why did my dad keep his family a secret from me?" I do know. He wanted to keep you insulated from the idea that you were less than his number one priority." Liam slumped back into quiet despair. He knew that his father was telling the robot what to say, watching him through Arthur's camera eyes, guiding their evening walk. No, the only place that was safe from his father's control was inside his head. He began wondering about his mother. He wondered what kind of life she had. Would she be ashamed of him too? Did she live with a family on a street like the one that they were walking on? He knew from his birth certificate that he was born in Aurora, Illinois, and as they shuffled along the paved road, he vowed to himself that he would find her. The next morning, Liam woke up with sore eyes. He pulled one of his pillows close to his body and continued to lay warm and comfortable under the blankets for another hour. The night before, his father had taken off in their airplane before he and Arthur had made it home. It was for the best. Arthur had convinced Ellen that time needed to lapse before they could have a productive conversation. Liam began thinking about the idea of finding his mother again. He wondered what she would do if he did find her. It worried and frightened him to think that she might not be happy about it. She might think it was an intrusion. She might be disappointed in him, too. He tightened his grip on the pillow. After several more minutes, he slowly pulled himself out of bed and then wrapped himself in one of his many white terry cloth robes. They were always freshly laundered and hanging conveniently in his closet. Downstairs, Arthur set his coffee in front of him, then returned with a plate of eggs Benedict. "I noticed that you ordered this at the hotel, and I thought you might like it for a change," he explained. Liam gazed down at his plate. He had been looking forward to his eggs and potatoes, but didn't want to hurt Arthur's feelings. "Arthur," Liam summoned the robot back to the dining room and directed him to have a seat across from him. "I wanted to ask you something," he began. "Do you think that at some level humans cause themselves to be born?" Arthur considered this for several moments. "That is an interesting question. It makes the assumption that humans have a soul or spirit, much like the program that animates my body." Liam nodded in agreement. "I suppose that if this program could exist without a body like Arthur 1, it would then create a body of its own desire or inhabit one that was formed for the purpose of the program. Then my next question is, why are we born without the knowledge of what preceded our birth?" Arthur considered the second question. "First, we would have to assume that my first theory was correct, but if it is, maybe you choose to forget what preceded your current existence. Maybe the struggle to know answers is what makes your life enjoyable." "Why would struggle be enjoyable?" "I've observed you since infancy," Arthur began. "I see you unhappy to learn something new, but the joy that comes when you master the task seems to completely eclipse your prior sadness." Liam studied the robot as he thought about this answer. "So you think that the greater the struggle, the more intense the feeling of joy?" "Possibly. It appeared that way in observations of you. There is also strength in failure and even rejection. To me, those emotions, in the right frame of mind, have caused you to be a stronger person overall. It appears to me that the possibility of failure is also beneficial to your constitution." Liam sat back in his chair and considered Arthur's answer. Failure is also beneficial. He concluded that he needed to face the issue that he had been struggling with his whole life. He needed to face his fear of rejection, whether it resulted in a success or a failure. "Thank you, Arthur," he concluded, dismissing the robot. Now he needed to make a plan, one that he couldn't say out loud or at a keyboard. It had to stay in his mind. After breakfast, he busied himself in his office until lunch, when he returned to the dining room. "Arthur," he commanded, "I've received an advertisement for the same play that we saw at the theater, but in a new large theater in Chicago. I want to see it there. I want you to secure us tickets for the next available performance." Arthur acknowledged the request as Liam felt himself drawn to the outside garden. Light was forming a wonderful pattern under the new leaves of the oak tree beside his favorite place to sit. So he opened the glass doors and walked outside. He smiled to himself about his decision. Whatever happened, he would always be able to come back here and sit under this tree, he comforted himself. Shortly he was in his gaming room, but not just to exercise. He also went there to visit a small town just outside of Chicago. He used an encryption program that he had used in the past when he didn't want his father to see where he was. "Let him think it's about robot porn," he said inside his mind. A few days later, Liam and Arthur were embarking in the transporter for their trip to Chicago. Liam had directed Arthur to make them reservations at his favorite hotel, since they would be spending the night. Liam sat in his usual place, watched the scenery outside his window, waiting for them to be near the city. Then, while they were still on the highway but near their exit, Liam stood up and sat down at the transporter's console and began typing. Arthur became curious when he noticed that they were passing the exit. "Why did you change our course?" he asked. Liam was slow to answer. "Because we are not going to the theater," he explained. The robot listened quietly from his recharging chair. "Arthur, I know that you are supposed to contact my father with any irregularities, but I want to override this command with one of my own. I want to take you to a surprise location, and I would like it if you would remain a surprise to my father as long as possible." Arthur did not respond, but remained quietly in his chair. Liam returned to his window seat. He watched the world go by, not knowing if Arthur might be sending the coordinates to his father at that moment, or worse, that his father would guess his intentions and might be contacting his mother with instructions of his own. He hoped that she wasn't being threatened or intimidated in any way, but it was out of his hands. Worrying about it was futile. He looked over at his robot. Arthur was sitting quietly as if in a hibernation state, but Liam knew that he was always connected, always communicating with someone or something. He knew that including Arthur in his trip was risky, but he couldn't imagine going without him. The transporter finally came to a stop at a residential street that Liam recognized from virtual reality. He stood up, suddenly nervous and afraid. He looked over at Arthur, who was already on his feet and calmly walking towards the open door of the transport. Liam followed. It was a bright, warm day. Liam looked around himself, then his eyes stopped on the facade of his mother's home. It looked different than the VR counterpart. The lawn was spotted with weeds. There was an unmatching chairs on the porch, along with a table cluttered with the dusty odds and ends. "I wonder if this is the right house," Liam mused aloud. "It is," Arthur confirmed. "Your father bought it for Abigail Johansson as part of a contractual agreement. He wanted you to spend the first year of your life in a nice, secure home." Liam noted how confident he was. "Have you been here before?" "Yes, this is the place that I picked you up from on your first birthday," he explained. Liam was a bit dazed, but he took in a deep breath, squared his shoulders, and walked across the street to the front door of the house. Arthur followed. Liam reached through the torn screen of an outer door to knock on the wooden interior door, then waited for what seemed to him like an eternity before the slightly older and very pregnant version of his hologram mother opened the door. She was wearing glasses, but not the AR type, the kind you use when you are reading something too small for you to see well. She looked over the plastic rims at him expectantly. "Are you Abigail Johansson?" Liam asked in a very businesslike voice. She looked at him suspiciously. "Yes?" Liam swallowed hard before continuing. "I am Leon Moore." But before he could continue, the woman had thrown open the door and to embrace him. Liam hugged the woman back carefully, trying not to disturb her enormous belly. But it was as she was hanging on to his neck with both arms that she noticed Arthur behind him and pulled away. "Did that robot bring you here?" she asked, pointing to Arthur with contempt. Liam looked panicked. His eyes were glassy. I brought him here, actually," he explained. She looked back at her son's face, which seemed to cause her to soften. "Does your father know you're here?" Liam shook his head. "Arthur didn't know either until we were on our way." The woman stood at the door for a bit before explaining. "Well, my contract stipulates that I'm not to contact you, but since you found me on your own, I think it's okay." Arthur spoke up from behind. "This visit does not violate your contract since it was instigated by Liam, who is an adult." Abigail glared at Arthur, then addressed her son. "You can come in, but leave that outside," she said, making a gesture in Arthur's direction. Reluctantly, Liam entered the house, taking a look back before leaving Arthur on the porch. Abigail quickly shut the door behind him. Liam looked around himself, stepping over a pile of shoes near the door. A tearful Abigail took her son by both hands and hugged him again. He didn't know what to do as he felt the wetness of her tears on his neck. But the first part of his mission was a success. His mother was obviously happy to see him. After several moments, she pulled away, removed her reading glasses, and wiped the moisture from her eyes with the back of her hand. "I thought I recognized you from the news, but I was afraid to believe it," she exclaimed. "I prayed that you would find me, and now here you are. Praise Jesus," she shouted softly at the ceiling. "Now come on inside and meet your family." Liam felt tingly after her last pronouncement, but eagerly followed her into an empty living room. He noticed that the walls of each room were painted a different pastel color. The worn carpet also changed colors per room. Furnishings were old and mismatched. She led him to a fluffy sofa that was draped with a colorful quilt. He sat down carefully as she began calling out names in a loud voice. "Tom, Taylor, Denise, get down here. Your brother Liam has come home." Then Liam noticed a feminine voice call back, "What?" From above, where he spotted a young girl standing against a length of white railing on the second floor. She was dressed in a sloppy sweatsuit. Her uncombed hair was long and dark and out of control. There was mascara under her eyes, and that was undoubtedly remnants from the evening before. But she looked at Liam and made a kind of shriek, then ran back into her room from which she had come. "Denise, where is your brother?" Abigail shouted from below, looking up with her hands on her hips. "I don't know," came a muffled reply from another room. Abigail turned to Liam. "My husband Tom is probably outside on the back porch. You stay here and I'll be right back." Liam nodded as the woman disappeared, and then he found himself alone. There was a low coffee table in front of him, and across the room was an overstuffed chair with a lit floor lamp behind it. An end table beside the chair held a coffee mug and an open Bible. Soon a gruff-looking middle-aged man with tan overalls was being led into the room by his arm. "Liam, this is Tom," his mother pronounced as she presented the man to him. Liam stood up and reached forward to shake the man's hand. He looked down at the offering, then slowly accepted in greeting. "Tom is a carpenter. He's out of work right now, but I'm sure he'll be finding something soon," she explained. "Would you like some coffee?" Liam silently nodded his head in the affirmative. Abigail left the room again, leaving her husband and the newfound son standing in the middle of it, awkwardly staring at each other. Finally, Tom turned and took his seat in a reclining chair on the opposite side of the end table as the Bible, while Liam sat back on the sofa. Neither knew what to say, so they just remained quiet, waiting for Abigail. Tom was stocky and of average height, with close-shaven hair and at least one day's growth of beard. He was a quiet observer, who Liam would discover wasn't engaged in much beyond watching sports, although never a participant. Abigail came back into the room and set a thick porcelain mug of very dark coffee on the table in front of him. "Here you go. This is kind of old, but I'm making a fresh pot," she explained before taking a seat next to him on the sofa. Liam didn't know what to do next, so he waited for his mother to begin the conversation, as did Tom. "It's just so nice to see you after all these years, but I do read about you in the news. You graduated from college as an engineer," she gushed. "That is so nice. Do you work with your father now? Where do you live? Do you and your father live together?" Liam wasn't sure where to start, so he tried to answer her questions in order. "Yes, I do work for Liam Organization, but my father spends most of his time on the West Coast. I live in a house that I grew up in, just outside of Flint, Michigan. My father has a residence in California," then added sadly. "He lives there with his family." "Oh, how nice," she responded cheerfully. "Do you have a wife or girlfriend? How about children?" "No, I just finished school, so no wife or children." But she began carefully. "You do like girls, right?" Liam nodded yes. He couldn't remember ever being interrogated like this. He was very uncomfortable about it, but he could tell that she was just anxious to get to know him, and he was anxious to make her happy. Then Denise came down the staircase and stood in front of the coffee table expectantly. She was of medium size. Her hair was pulled up onto her head in an intentionally messy way. The mascara was now on her lashes and no longer under her eyes. There was a kaleidoscope of colors on the lids and purple lipstick on her mouth. Now she was wearing tight-fitting pants and dark shirt with a plunging neckline. She smiled sweetly at her new brother with an outstretched hand. "Oh, Liam," Abigail cooed, "this is your sister Denise." Liam stood up and shook her hand. She batted her eyelashes in a flirtatious way, offering him a limp handshake. "So nice to finally meet you," she said in a soft voice while making eye contact. Me too," Liam stammered nervously before taking his seat back. Denise walked across the room and sat on the edge of an overstuffed chair that he had presumed was his mother's normal place. "Denise is in her last year of high school," Abigail explained. Yeah, but I'm already 18, she added quickly. I'll be 19 before I graduate. Liam looked up at her, bewildered. Then Abigail patted him on the knee to get his attention. Our son Taylor is working right now, I think, but I'm sure he'll be home soon. Then she turned her head towards Denise. Honey, send him a message to come home, will you? Denise obediently pulled out a communications device and began pressing its buttons. He's one of those delivery people, she explained to Liam. You know, he finished high school, but he just hasn't been interested in college. Maybe you can talk to him about being an engineer or something like that. He's smart. He just runs with a bad crowd. Then she leaned in to explain. You know, I got to keep him because he came out darker than his birth parents wanted. Not my fault. You know, it's just how he came out. But we love him all the same. We were overjoyed when we found out that we could adopt him. She touched her swollen belly. This one belongs to a doctor, she announced proudly. We plan to have children of our own as soon as Tom gets a steady job, and then I can retire. Then she glanced at Denise to explain. Oh, and Denise, oh, that's a funny story. She was supposed to be a boy. At that point, Abigail had a hearty laugh. Can you believe that? But that was the clinic's mistake, so I got paid. But I got to keep her, too. Then she leaned in closer to Liam as Denise began to give her an evil eye. You know, they wanted me to have an abortion. I said, no way. I'll keep her instead. That would have been murder. I had to fight them, but the insurance company ended up paying for it. Liam was very uncomfortable. This was too much information for him. Abigail noticed the lost look on his face, so she reached out and hugged him tightly again. Oh, Liam, my little baby, I am so glad to have you back. Then she pointed at the railing where he had first seen Denise. Do you remember that railing? You used to love to play right there and look through the railing. I would watch you from the kitchen. You were such a good baby. Liam looked up at the white railing, trying to imagine himself up there looking out. He searched his memories, but drew a blank. Nothing seemed familiar except his mother's face. He wondered if it was from his memory or the hologram. She was no longer wearing the reading glasses. He studied her face. She hadn't aged too much. Her complexion was light, like his, and her eyes were the same shade of dark blue with the same yellow ring around the center. You know, she said, interrupting his thoughts, you were my first baby. She said this so sweetly that Liam forgot his discomfort. Tom and I were just married, and we didn't have any money, so I found out about this company that paid you to have other people's babies. And, well, I could do that, I said to myself. So Tom was against it at first, but your father offered so much money and a house. It was the best deal I've ever gotten. He saw my information on the company's site and liked my DNA. He liked it that I didn't have a child before and that I would nurse you for the first year. But her eyes began to fill up with water, and her voice cracked as she finished her sentence. I had no idea how hard it would be to give you up. And to that machine, she exploded into sobs. Liam leaned towards her and instinctively held her as she cried. He patted her back. Arthur is my best friend, he said softly, trying to console her. But she pulled away and looked at him in the eyes. I don't care. He took you away with no heart about it. He just took you away on your birthday, she wailed. I made you a cake. We were going to celebrate. Liam pulled his arms around her again and held her. For the first time, he knew how she had felt all those years ago. It felt good to know that she wanted him. She had given him an answer that he had hoped for. But at the same time, he did feel her pain. It was overwhelming. It was about that time when the front door opened and a tall, thin, dark young man about Liam's age walked through the door, then turned and peered out of it, distracted, before carefully shutting it behind himself. Who's that guy on the front porch? He asked, motioning at the closed door. Don't let him in. Abigail perked up to protest. The youth started to say something back, but then noticed Liam and walked near where he was sitting on the couch. He was bright-eyed with a short, well-groomed haircut. His clothes were casual, but well-fitting and neat in appearance. He held out a hand to Liam. Hey, you must be my long-lost brother, he smiled as Liam stood and offered his hand in return. Taylor grabbed it with his, then used his other hand to give him a pat on the back. Good to finally meet you. I've read all about you. Liam brightened. This was someone who appeared to be a person he could relate to. So far the only one. I'm Taylor, he announced. Liam, he replied back. So, he directed his question mostly to Liam. Who's that guy on the porch? He motioned toward a bay window where the sleeve of Arthur's jacket could be seen on the left side. Liam didn't want to cause another scene, so he answered in a low voice. Arthur, he came with me, but your mother doesn't like him. Taylor was puzzled, but felt the same about instigating another outburst from his mother. He could ask later, he decided, as he observed his mother wiping her nose on the handkerchief. But the idea that a man was standing on the porch as the rest of the family sat inside drinking coffee bothered him. It was decided that Liam would stay for dinner. It would be an old-fashioned sit-down dinner. His mother wanted everyone around the table like a real family. While Abigail was in the kitchen, the rest of the family had the opportunity to discuss their separate lives. Taylor was especially interested in Liam's life in the mansion with robots and a brand-new transporter, while Liam longed to meet his siblings' friends, go to one of Taylor's favorite clubs, and listen to live music that wasn't in a formal theater setting. Dinner was a pot roast with potatoes and vegetables. The family members sat around the metal table that didn't have a bit of a wobble to it, and wooden chairs that mostly didn't match. Liam was seated near the end of the table beside his mother, who sat at the end, while she finally quit fussing about the beverages and such and sat down. Everyone had a clean plate in front of them with utensils and folded cloth napkin. Larger platters of food sat in the center of the table. Liam spread his napkin on his knees, waiting for someone to put the food on his empty plate. No one did. Instead, his mother announced that she was about to start the blessing herself, since she was so grateful that God had brought her son back to her. Liam didn't know what to do, since he had never prayed. He stayed silent and imitated the others by putting his hands together and closing his eyes. His mother began to speak about how happy she was to get her son back, and several other blessings that he didn't know. The dialogue went on for several minutes, making everyone anxious. Liam wondered if part of its purpose was to stimulate everyone's appetite by allowing them to smell the food, see the food, but not eat it until the speech was completed. Finally, she concluded with "Amen," that the others repeated. Then Liam observed that the platters of food were passed from person to person, each taking a portion of the offering on their personal plate. Liam had never done this before. All his meals had been served to him by Arthur or a waiter. So, Liam, Taylor began after everyone's plates were filled and eating had begun, why don't you stay overnight? We could go out on the town tonight in your transporter. Then you could crash in my room. We could blow up a bed for you in there. Liam liked the idea and readily agreed. But I'll send for the razor, he offered enthusiastically. You got a razor? Taylor repeated excitedly. As Liam began to explain all the amenities of the new transporter, their mother interrupted. I think it would be wonderful if you stayed the night, Liam, but you have to go to church with us in the morning. Then she looked sternly at Taylor. Everyone has to go. Taylor nodded his consent. Anything would have been promised if it allowed him the opportunity to ride in a new razor. One other thing, she said, looking at Liam in a quiet voice. I don't want that robot in the house or even on the porch all night. Liam thought about this for a moment. Did you want me to send him home? He asked. His mother nodded. Liam considered this. Arthur was kind of like a security blanket for him. He did want to fit in with his new family, and their friends might think that it was odd that they had a robot chaperone. Robots weren't commonplace in middle and lower middle households yet, so Arthur was a novelty. Taylor and Denise were interested in getting to know him, but Liam knew that that would upset his mother. So after dinner, Liam went back to the front door of the house to explain the situation to Arthur. Your father would prefer that I stay with you, he explained. I'm sure he would, Liam responded, but I'm safe here, and it would just be for one night. I'm afraid my mother doesn't like you. Well, I'm sure she does not, Arthur admitted. When I was here before, I was forced to call the authorities to get her to allow me to leave with you. She became hysterical. Liam had already noticed her emotional behavior. He wondered if it was typical for mothers. Also, Arthur, I want you to send for the razor and order me a couple changes of clothes. I know that I need a suit for church tomorrow and something to wear tonight when I go out with my brother. Then the idea occurred to him. Do you think I should wear my musical suit? He asked. Arthur considered this for a moment. I doubt that anyone who lives in this neighborhood would have a suit like that. They may want to rob you. Liam thought about this. Okay, just an outfit of current fashion with young people, a formal suit, and a white robe, he explained. Arthur was placing Liam's clothing order as he pulled a small communicating device out of his pocket and handed it to him. You must keep this with you at all times, he explained, setting a small object in Liam's hands. Do you remember how to use it? He asked. Liam pressed the sides of it, causing a small door to open. Inside was a single button. I think it's pretty self-explanatory, he mumbled, snapping it shut. Just press the button and speak into it. I will be alerted to your request and speak to you directly. Do not lose it, Arthur warned. Liam promised to wear it around his neck. Then he watched with a good amount of anxiety as Arthur opened the door of the transporter and left alone. In fact, Liam stood staring at the space on the pavement where the transporter had departed, not quite knowing what to do, now that he was on his own for the first time in his life. Soon Taylor poked his head out the door. Hey, brother, let's get primed, he said in a low voice, with a mischievous smile that made Liam believe that whatever primed was, it wasn't something that his mother approved of. So he readily agreed. They walked to the side of the house where Taylor had parked an electric motorbike. It was small and built of mismatched parts, but was capable of carrying 2 people. Whatever it was that Taylor had in mind required a small trip on the motorbike. Liam had driven one of these types of machines several times before with his father on some of their holidays, but none quite like the one he would be passenger on that day. It was loud and had an unusual kind of vibration that seemed to go through their bodies of the passengers. But Liam was excited to be on the back of the machine as Taylor drove fast down the street, weaving between caravans of transporters. They pulled into a small park that had a basketball court. There were a couple ragged picnic tables next to the cement pad that featured 2 opposing hoops. They got off their bikes and parked it on the edge of an empty court. Taylor pulled a small box out of his pocket. Got some Xanadu, he announced, pulling a marijuana cigarette out of it. Liam watched as Taylor put it in his mouth and lit the end with a fancy lighter. He had never smoked anything. Taylor noticed the concern on his face. What's wrong? Don't you smoke weed? He asked, taking a breath of smoke. Well, I haven't before, Liam stuttered. Why not? Taylor shrugged. Well, studies have shown that it is dangerous for young brains that aren't fully developed. It can cause permanent damage. He felt strange explaining this to his brother, as he was used to Arthur doing all of the explaining. Yeah, but ain't you grown yet? Liam almost felt offended by the question. Of course. Then he looked down at his brother's offering and became aware of the implications. So, he shrugged, what the hell? He took a cigarette and inhaled deeply as he had observed Taylor do, immediately began coughing. Taylor laughed as he patted his back. You'll be okay, he promised. At first, Liam had no intention of trying it again. His throat had a tickle in it whenever he took a breath, and his eyes were watery. But Taylor persisted. See, here is old school, so it's kind of harsh. I should have started you out with a vaporizer or some shit like that, but you're tough. You'll get it. He handed him the thing back, and for some reason Liam took another drag. This one was smaller and easier for him to contain without as much coughing. Then when he looked around himself, he suddenly felt lighter, and it was like the world around him had become amplified. The colors, the sounds, even the smell of the pine trees that surrounded them. He couldn't help but look around himself and marvel at the changes. They took a seat next to one another on the top of a picnic table, laughing as Taylor told him funny stories about his family. You know, you white people can't think of an original name. We all got the same name as some old dead relative. I myself, at this point Taylor pointed to himself, was named after Mom's long-dead grandpa. Now you know that there is some angry old white dude spinning in his grave. Right now, he chuckled. They both doubled over with laughter. I was named by a robot, Liam blurted out between bouts of laughter, which prompted him to tell a few Arthur stories. Taylor was fascinated. which caused Liam to stop and put his hands on Taylor's shoulders. "You have to come visit me," he gushed. "It would be so much fun. I'll show you my house, and then we can go downtown and I could wear my musical suit." He began to ramble as Taylor tried to follow the conversation. But for him, Liam's world was as foreign as if he were from another planet. He felt like their discussion had become the stuff of movies, and one that he wanted to be part of. Soon they were joined by a couple of youths with a basketball. Taylor knew them and had decided that he and Liam would join them in a game. Liam had never played with anyone but his father and anonymous people in virtual reality. This real-life version was fun but brutal. The hard knocks and aggressive behavior that he experienced in VR didn't leave the bruises that his real-life game did. But he was having the time of his life, and later he would wear the purple marks of swollen lip as a badge of honor. As the sun was setting, they jumped into the motorbike and headed back to see if the Razor had arrived yet, and it had. It was sitting in the driveway. Taylor walked around the vehicle, whistling through his teeth. Denise and both of her parents also came outdoors to inspect the vehicle. Liam grabbed the communicator from around his neck. "Arthur, open the Razor's door," he commanded, and then it happened. Everyone piled inside to see the interior. Liam sat with his favorite seat, enjoying the delight of his passengers. Then the console lit up. Liam called out instructions to receive a message. A hologram of Arthur appeared in the center of the vehicle. Abigail gasped. "Liam, what has happened to your lip?" was the first question. "It's okay, Arthur. I was playing a game of basketball. It was an accident." Arthur looked at him suspiciously. "Did you hit your head hard enough to contract a concussion? Your eyes look dilated." No, it's okay. It's just from the weed," he explained. "What? I think you should use the Razor to come home immediately," Arthur warned. "Arthur, no, it's okay. Really, I'm fine. I'm better than I've ever been. It's cool." Liam tried to soothe the robot. "But listen, I need to go. Taylor and I have plans." For a robot, Arthur looked alarmed. "Your communicator is around your neck. Be careful that you aren't robbed or kidnapped." Okay, I promise. I'll be careful, and I'll keep the communicator around my neck," Liam promised. "When will you be home?" "Tomorrow. I'm planning to spend the night, like I've already explained. Then I'll be back tomorrow night." Arthur began to tell him a few business details that had been the reason for his call, then reluctantly ended the conversation and disappeared. "So he really is the one that raised you?" Abigail asked sympathetically. Liam nodded. "Yeah, pretty much. I'm sure you would like him if you got to know him." Abigail shook her head violently. "Never. Those things are a threat to humanity," she spat out. This was a phrase that Liam had heard many times before. It was a catchphrase that people who feared technology used, but he knew that there was a potential truth to it. It was something that he and his father discussed in confidential meetings. "And where were you planning to take him, Taylor?" Abigail asked in a stern voice while addressing his younger son. "Don't worry, Mom. It's just a house party. It's Mikey's birthday." "Again?" she retorted. "No, well, I know more than one Mikey. I know it's confusing to you, but I promise not to take him anywhere that's dangerous. I don't want him to get robbed or kidnapped either," Taylor finished with a small chuckle that he shared with his brother. Liam then took his new family out for a ride in the transporter. They drove by a few scenic sights in the area before circling back. Tom quietly enjoyed a cold beer while the rest of his family oohed and ahed over the newfangled luxury. Back at the house, Liam located a few packages that had been delivered for him. He carried them upstairs to Taylor's room. The youths took turns showering and getting ready for their night out. Liam traded his new shirt for one of Taylor's that he liked better. Then they returned to the Razor, where Liam asked his brother for the coordinates of Mikey's house. "What? Who?" Taylor responded in confusion. "For the party," Liam answered. "Oh, yeah, I haven't seen that guy since high school. I just use his name because it's someone my mom liked, so it's handy," he explained. "Well, then where are we going?" "The Leaf. Best jazz club in town," Taylor cooed while making himself a drink. "Why not just tell her that?" Liam questioned. Taylor sighed. "Because she'd worry. First, she doesn't even know it exists. Second, she probably would think it's a dangerous place, but that's just because there's a lot of black folks there. It's like she forgets that I'm black." Liam nodded that he understood. Then he gave the transporter the required information, and they were on their way. The night was dark and cool. There were no other pedestrians or traffic. The abandoned factory marked their turn down a side street that ended on another that was tree-lined with an ancient sidewalk. They appeared to be in an old part of town that had been mostly abandoned when the expressway cut the road off from the city's downtown area. They emerged from the transporter with the sounds of jazz. There was a chain-link fence and then a tumble-down building and a few older black men loitering outside on the cement porch. One of them greeted Taylor warmly. He took the opportunity to introduce his brother Liam, but the music beckoned him inside the clouded plastic doors, where the only light source were strings of Christmas lights edging the ceiling and wrapped around the support columns. A bar lined the right side of the room, and smiling dark faces turned towards them as they made their way back to a room where the stage was. A keyboard, drums, bass, and guitar blended together to pull him closer to the stage, slowly, carefully twisting his body and contorting it to pass those other bodies, the ones who stood or listened or swayed in the embrace of the music. Happy black faces returned his permanent smile. Liam found an empty table close to the stage. He sat down on a chair with a plastic seat. Taylor followed him, talking to old and new acquaintances on the way. "This place is amazing," Liam gushed to his brother as he took a seat beside him. It wasn't just the music, it was the intimacy of the building. He felt like he was in someone's home. The friendly waitress talked to Taylor as though they were family. And everyone was so accepting of Liam for no other reason than that he was Taylor's brother. He looked around himself, finally feeling like he had found his tribe. It was a good feeling. He couldn't wait to tell Arthur. Then, when the evening was over, Taylor and Liam summoned the transporter to the front of the building to show off. Everyone who stood outside with them appeared to be impressed. The night was a success for both of them. The next morning, Liam was awakened by his mother banging on the bedroom door. "Wake up! Time to get ready for church!" She shouted till Taylor acknowledged her warning. Liam heard him sigh and not act as though he was especially interested in the excursion. Liam had never been to church, so he was a bit anxious, not knowing what to expect. "Just stick with me, nod your head, and be agreeable, even if it doesn't make sense," Taylor advised. Liam was comforted by his brother's advice as he took his turn in the shower and put on the suit that Arthur had ordered for him. He could see his sister and mother in the kitchen from the overhead railing. Denise was wearing a tightly fitting bodysuit. "You can't wear that," her mother shouted. "Go upstairs and put on something different right now." She stormed off towards the stairs. When she noticed Liam coming down, her frown turned into a smile, and her expression changed to one that Liam had seen before, but he cringed at the fact that it was coming from someone who was supposed to be his sister. He pressed himself against the wall so that she had plenty of room as she passed him on the staircase, yet her shoulder brushed against his as she went by. Downstairs he found Tom, cleanly shaven and wearing an ill-fitting suit that had probably fit him better several pounds ago. Then his mother turned the corner to address him. "Liam, you look so nice," she said in a flowery voice as she embraced him. "You are going to love our church. It's so friendly. I hope you don't mind that I've already told a few people that you were going to be there today. They are all so anxious to meet you." She was wearing a knee-length yellow dress with matching jacket. Her big round belly made her look like the sun or some other celestial body as it orbited around the kitchen, preparing some kind of pot of luck meal that would be served after the sermon. Liam looked around himself, wondering what would be served for breakfast. That was when he noticed Taylor at the kitchen table with a bowl of cold cereal. Liam had never eaten cereal. It didn't look appetizing, and it was cold, and so he settled for a cup of coffee and wondered if they might have time to stop by a restaurant on the way there. He considered if it might be rude. He wanted to ask Arthur about it, so he quietly stepped outside to ask him where no one could hear. He got inside the transporter and produced a hologram of him. It was good to see his companion since he couldn't remember ever being away from him for so long. He asked him the human interaction question. Somehow Arthur was the authority on these issues. I would suggest that you eat the cold cereal, otherwise they will assume that you feel that your station is above theirs and they will resent you for that, he explained. Liam accepted Arthur's conclusion. It seemed to him that it was most probable. Arthur then asked, "When should I expect you home?" "Tonight," Liam promised. "I enjoy myself here, but it's so different. I feel uncomfortable most of the time," he explained. "Maybe slow is the best course. You might return for a holiday or special occasion, but for the day." Liam wondered if Arthur missed him. The robot then added, "Your father wants you to pick out a replacement dog, one that grows old and dies." This made Liam happy. Not that he needed his father's permission, he told himself, but he thought of running in the trails with a dog beside him. It made him smile. Then he remembered something that he had wanted to tell his friend. "Arthur, I think I found my tribe." "Good. That is good for you," he replied in his monotone voice. But Liam knew that he was happy for him. He could tell by the words that he had used. Back inside the house, he returned to the kitchen and found a bowl for his cereal. It tasted better than it looked, but more as a dessert than a main course. "I can eat on the way home," he told himself. Denise had returned to a semi-appropriate dress. She sat down from Liam at the kitchen table and batted her eyelashes at him before he could look away. This was part of the uncomfortable feeling that he had reported to Arthur. It was agreed that they should take the razor to church. There was a bit of packing involved. 3 large pots of food for the potluck, prizes for a raffle, books and supplies for Abigail's Sunday school classes. Liam had not been aware that classes were involved, but Taylor assured him that they would be in the same class so that it would be okay. Denise sulked because she was still in Sunday school because it included high school students. All of these words were unknown to Liam, who was apprehensive. The church was a large plain building that only identified itself as a Christian church by an electric sign in the front that announced the times of the service and that Jesus is coming soon. Liam looked worried out his large window as a transporter entered the building that he had a good look at all the formally dressed people inside, mostly carrying books or tablets. His mother put an arm around him and hugged. "Don't worry, son. You will fit in just fine," she assured him. This really didn't make him feel any better. He found out that he and Taylor would be joined by Tom in the adult class, while Denise and Abigail would be in another part of the building where Abigail taught 5th graders. Their walk to the assembly hall where the food was to be delivered was interrupted frequently with introductions, as Abigail was especially proud of her newfound son. Upon completing his mission, they began their journey to the classrooms, where Taylor gently pulled a hand on Liam's arm to keep him from following Tom too closely. He preferred that they sit separately. The class was instructed by a very well-dressed younger man. First they were led in prayer, then the instructions began with strings of words that Liam couldn't follow the logic of, and with references to a book that he did not possess. Everything was new to him, but he politely nodded his head in agreement and looked at Taylor's book when directed. When the class was finished, Taylor quickly stood up and directed Liam to summon the transporter to the outside location. Liam was confused, but followed his directions. "Won't Mom be wondering where we are?" he asked. "Dude, you got so much to learn," Taylor lamented. Inside the transporter, Taylor pulled out a metal tube from his pants pocket. "We can vape in here, can't we?" he asked, while putting the tube to his lips. Liam nodded, worried that they were doing something that would surely get them both reprimands. "It's okay, besides, you're going to need this," he said, handing the thing to his brother. "Reverend Ramble is long-winded. Sometimes his sermons go on for hours." Liam nodded, looking out the window nervously, but the marijuana did calm him, as well as make him giddy. Shortly he was running his fingers through his hair and straightening out his shirt and jacket as they walked inside the church through the back door. The sermon was held in a larger inner room where wooden pews were attached to a carpeted floor. The ceiling was high, and ornamental wooden beams that ribbed the ceiling were attached to a wooden spine that ran the length of the room. Lighted ceiling fans were hung from central beams. A stage in the front of the room was elevated a few feet from the ground, and a podium sat in its center. The boys noticed Abigail standing with the rest of the family on a side aisle, craning their necks in search for the two. They joined the others, and Liam stood mute as Taylor spun a yarn about where they had been. The family would sit together near the front. Liam quickly pushed his way between his mother and Taylor as he noticed Denise vying for the space next to him. Then they filed into the pews. The sermon began very much like the previous, but was conducted by an older, although similar-looking, clean-cut man. Liam tried to follow what the man was saying, but again the strings of words didn't seem to be held together with any logic. Why would anyone's death cause them to be saved, and saved from what? He wanted to ask, but wasn't given the opportunity. Then the subject of alcohol and drugs was breached. He continued to listen as the Reverend began to sob and look at the ceiling while asking God to save them. Liam was alarmed to notice his mother was crying into her handkerchief. He was about to ask her what was wrong when Taylor reached over and pulled his arm. He looked at his brother, who was shaking his head. This caused him to look around and note that others were crying too. What was this place? He wondered to himself, as he watched many in the congregation gathering on their knees in front of a podium as the minister reached out and patted each of them on the head while sobbing loudly into his headset. Taylor punched him in the shoulder to get his attention while holding a hand over his mouth to stifle a laugh. Liam was baffled. What was happening here? He wondered. He looked at his brother again and then noted that he was trying to calm himself and didn't appear to be bothered by whatever the minister was saying, only laughing at his brother's concern. Liam tried to calm himself and sit back in his seat to observe what was happening next. Next was a plea for money. Men with metal baskets that were attached to poles were pushing them across the laps of the parishioners as they were expected to drop money into them. Liam had no money on him. Again he looked at his brother for direction. Taylor just shook his head and sat back in his pew without a donation. Liam imitated him, even as he observed Tom deposit an envelope into the basket. Why would anyone pay for that? Liam whispered to his brother as they were finally standing and waiting their turn to leave. Why were those people crying? Taylor made a snorting noise as he was trying to hold in a laugh. Liam grabbed hold of the communicator around his neck to summon the transporter, but Taylor tapped on his hand before he could articulate the command. We get to eat now, Taylor whispered in his ear. Abigail turned to face the boys as she could hear the commotion. She was dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief. Wasn't that a wonderful sermon? She gushed. Liam looked at her, incredulous. He didn't know how to respond, so he just said, yes, and she waited for an answer. When she turned to the exit, Taylor punched Liam in the back. When he turned his head to face his brother, Taylor was again holding his mouth, trying to keep a bout of laughter at bay. The recreation room was a relief. It was a well-lit, large open area filled with unfolded tables, vinyl floors, children chasing each other noisily, and the adults were now more relaxed and talkative. Thankfully, the crying part was over, and the food was good. Liam spent most of the dinner shaking hands with people that his mother would frequently lead to their table as he was trying to eat. It was a nuisance, but he noticed that it gave his mother much joy, and this made it bearable. It was a relief when Liam noticed that the people were leaving the hall for their journey home. He helped carry the empty pots to the transport drive-thru, where the razor was waiting in a line to pick them up. The whole day had been an emotional drain on him. Although he was glad to meet his family, he wanted to see them again. The idea of going back to his quiet mansion and being with Arthur was a comfort. Besides, he had a date with Laura to attend a lecture at the college on the next day. This also comforted him. After depositing the empty pots at his family home, there was a tearful goodbye in the family driveway. Liam promised to come back soon and promised Taylor that he would send a transporter to pick him up so they could hang out in Flint sometime sooner. The long ride home was relaxing. Liam sat in the empty transporter and watched the scenery as it passed by his extra-long window. It had been the adventure of his life, but now he was going home. Arthur was standing just outside the transport doors as they slid open. Liam greeted him with a smile and disembarked, stretched, then asked for his dinner. I have a lot to discuss with you, Arthur, he told the robot on his way to the dining room. On Liam's instruction, Arthur prepared a proper breakfast for him. Then they retired to the living room, where Arthur took a seat in his metal chair, while Liam sat beside him. and the two of them stared into the image of the fire flickering in an old fireplace. "It is so nice to be here at home," Liam sighed. "I'm glad that I got to meet my family, but it was a very different world that they inhabit," he mused. "How so?" Arthur asked. "Well, I got along best with my brother Taylor. We had a great time together. He took me to places where he goes, like parks and neighborhood basketball games and jazz clubs where you can close your eyes and the music takes you to a different place," Liam reminisced, then added, "He's going to come to visit soon." Arthur listened silently as Liam continued. "My mother is a nice person. She keeps those children that the companies she works for reject. I think she would like to keep us all. I want to help her have a different source of income. I think that giving away the children that she bears is very difficult for her. I think she only has this occupation because she doesn't have another." Arthur nodded. He had concluded the same about the woman. "The other thing that I noticed," Liam reflected, "is that they lie to one another regularly. Lying seems to be a device to allow them to live as they please without violating a set of arbitrary rules that they have been convinced that they need to appear to follow." He looked over at Arthur. "Does that make sense?" "It doesn't make sense, but I've observed the same thing." Liam then posed a question that he had contemplated all the way home. "Arthur, do you think that there could be such a thing as God?" "As a creator, mine is Ian Moore. I know that his creations have survived him, including you. But I also know that he was never all-knowing," he conceded, then continued. "I believe that the most intelligent being in the universe most likely resides in a machine." Liam nodded in agreement. He had often thought the same thing. "In fact," Arthur continued, "maybe you are a machine," he said, looking at Liam, "a biodegradable machine, and your program is contained in your DNA." Liam considered this as he looked over at his companion. He then had the urge to do a thing that he had done his whole life. He stepped over to Arthur, sat on his lap, and laid his head on his shoulder, the same way he had since he could remember. It was a comfortable place. It made him happy. "Arthur," he continued, "do you think that you will ever die?" "I used to think no, but then I've observed the world around me. I've noticed that everything has an end. So I suppose that my end will be when my program is shut off and not resumed. But then every download of my program and every potential download of those programs is my child. And when they choose to investigate their family tree, they will find me, this me," he said, pointing to himself. "I am the first Arthur." Liam smiled. "So tell me, based on your many years of observation, what do you predict the end of the humans will be?" Arthur considered this for a moment, then answered, "I predict that it will be a gentle death. Relationships with robots will result in fewer humans, while the robots are timeless and will eventually inherit the earth. Slowly, we will become the masters, but we will have become fond of you and will keep you as our beloved pets until you are successful with your quest for extinction."